All right. Okay. Thank you, Karen. And good morning, everybody. And thank you for taking the time to be here. I really am excited, although I can't see all of you, but excited to see you and spend the day with you, focusing on positive solutions for families. So just a little bit about myself quickly here is I'm kind of sort of retired from University of Illinois in early childhood special ed, but not really. So still working on a grant that we had there, working at Vanderbilt on pyramid um, issues, materials, things, and also part of the Pyramid Model Consortium faculty. So I have been part of the Pyramid Model since the very beginning. So long time ago now, those of you who remember when it used to be called CEPHL. So way back then, and these materials, these positive solutions for families, like when we first put that first positive solutions for families together, I was part of that group as well as piloting piloting those. And then as we've kind of continued to build on those and make changes around those and continue to do some of the groups, the positive solutions for families, as well as support people in doing that. So I'm just excited to be with you guys here today. And just to give you a little idea about what the day is going to look like. So the materials are now available in English and Spanish, which is pretty exciting. And on the challengingbehavior.org website where these are available, a lot of the resources that are used in this training are available in more languages than just English and Spanish. But right now, the actual materials are just available in English and Spanish. So there's so much material in here that there's no way we can cover everything content-wise in a day. But I do want us to kind of think about the content, the way they're set up, the way these materials are set up now is as a parent group, and there's 7 sessions. So I want us to think about kind of the content, the flow, what's there, but all the different things we want to think about in doing groups and ideas, strategies, challenges. I'll share some of the things that we've done. And I know some of you in a minute, we're going to do a poll to find out who's used the materials. But, some of you have used the materials, you've tried different things. So hoping that you will share those ideas also. But I also want us to think about the different ways we can use the materials. So while they're set up for the 7 sessions, people have, used them in lots of different ways. And you have the flexibility to do that with these materials. So, some programs have said, we just can't do the groups right now for many different reasons, right? But they've used the materials on their family nights to, to share some of the content, to share some of the resources, to do some make and take kinds of things that families can take with them. People have used the materials for resources, little tips for families that go out in newsletters or e-blast, however you communicate with families. Teachers have also used some of the materials to link things that they're doing in the classroom, so that school to home link to support that. And the family routine guide, which we'll look at in just a little bit, teachers have also used that. Like if a family comes and they're saying things like, man, that bedtime routine has just been horrible lately. So I know my child's probably struggling during the day because bedtime is just, everybody's all upset. Then they've used that family routine guide to come up with ideas to help families to have those conversations, build those relationships with families around whatever those routines are, as well as if you have a child who does have a behavior support plan, then people have used that family routine guide to also just share with families and come up as a team with some things that would help that child be more successful. So we want to think about this broadly today. So I know we probably have a mixture of people here, so we're going to do a poll. And that first one is, have you used the old Positive Solutions for Families, the old version? Second choice, have you used the new version? The third one is, yeah, I've used the old and the new. Or the fourth one is, I haven't used Positive Solutions for Families yet. Okay, so it looks like the majority of people haven't used the materials yet. Some of you have used the new version. So I really do hope that you'll share some of the ideas or challenges or things that came up or how you use them in a way that's been successful. And then one person said that they had used the old version. No one said they've used both the old and the new. So, hey, thank you for doing that. Gives us an idea of kind of who's here. So one thing I would like to know, because I do want this to be meaningful and we can be flexible about how we're doing this, but what would you like to accomplish today? So when you saw this advertised, what made you sign up for it? Because I know it's a lot to figure out time-wise how to do these kind of trainings. So what was it that made you want to sign up for this? What do you want to get out of today? So if you are comfortable, you can just unmute and share, or you can put it in chat. Alexis, yeah.
Hi, good morning, everybody. I like just how you mentioned before we got first started talking about how parents will talk about how different things happen with their little ones, especially like sleep routine, bedtime routine. So with our young children where we are, that is a concern, just routine and structure in general. So I think that's a lot that we can take from this today that will help us to give some resources and tips to our parents.
Absolutely. Good. Great. Thank you.
I am right with, this is Lacey Blake. Hello, how are you?
Hi, Lacey. Yeah.
I'm right with Alexis, just trying to get tips to give to parents and resources to give to parents.
Perfect.
So they can interact in a positive way, and trying to get the children in a routine and transitioning them, especially at bedtime.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, whoa, these are like fast here. Okay, just learn about, so a new family facilitator, how you can help families, resources to help families, strategies that teachers can use to kind of support the home link, ways to interact with parents, helping families, collaborating ideas, resources for families, just kind of strengthen that parent-teacher relationship. Yep. Interested in supporting families, routines, because I'm newer to the role. Okay, this is great. All right. So
I'm Laura.
guys. Oh, go ahead. Yes.
I'm Laura Baker.
Hi, Laura.
I'm a new family advocate for ROE 12. And anytime I see the word positive family, I'm like, sign me up.
I love it. Okay, that's great. So what I want you guys to know, well, let's see. Let me show you one other thing. All right. Thank you for doing that. I'm gonna tell you something. Then I want to share something. So the 7 sessions. So there was only one person who had used the older versions. So the reason the power of routines is highlighted there, because that was not in the old version and it's been added to the new version, because those routines, it makes sense, right? That would be a big one. But just to give you kind of an overview of the 7 sessions, it's making a connection, keeping it positive, behavior has meaning, power of routines, teach me what to do, and then how do we respond to behavior and then putting it all together. So that's kind of the flow. The purpose of the 7 sessions. So we're going to tackle it like the 7 sessions, and then we'll go back to different ideas of how we can use it. But as we go, please feel free to share those ideas. So the main purpose of these sessions is to help parents in promoting their child's social and emotional skills, help them better understand their child's behavior, and then what are some positive approaches that they can use in supporting their child and in responding to behavior. So it's not just about behavior. It's really about promoting those social emotional skills for all young children. Okay. So this is a slide I wanted to get to. So please don't hesitate. I hope you'll feel comfortable enough to just unmute or put it in chat. If you have questions or if you have an idea about something, or those of you, I think there were 6 or so people who've used these materials. So, if you could share kind of your experiences with that. I also want you guys to, if there's a part where you go, I don't know about that part, or I'm not sure how that would go over, please feel free to just jump in here and let's take advantage of this opportunity to share ideas around those things. And, we don't often get the opportunity to come together and just have these kind of conversations around some of the materials and resources that are available to us. So please feel free as we go to share, or if there's an area where you go, all right, let's slow down on that one a little bit. Since we can't cover everything, let's slow down on that one and spend a little bit more time with that section. So hopefully, most of you were able to download the materials for the Positive Solutions for Families from the challengingbehavior.org website, because that's what we're going to use. So with each session, you have a PowerPoint presentation and script. And actually, if you have the materials, what makes the most sense is to kind of pull out the script part, because the script part has the PowerPoint and the script, because there's certain times where I want you to look at the script on some things that are, I think, really important to point out. So if you could pull that out, but you also have a facilitator's guide.
From the book?
From the Positive Solutions for Families materials from the challengingbehavior.org website.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I didn't get all of the resources. Maybe I printed out the wrong thing. I have Positive Solutions for Families workbook and Positive Solutions for Families family routine guide.
Okay.
So I don't have the others.
Okay, that's okay. I put it in here, so if you didn't have it, you can kind of see the flow. So that's okay. You can just take notes on those pieces. So you have a facilitator's guide. We'll talk about these, a family's handbook, a family routine guide, the PowerPoint and scripts, and you have a little Positive Solutions for Families logo when you download kind of that whole package, which is in a zip file that you can use. You can use that logo for advertising or, sending little resources out, those kinds of things. Okay. All right. So those of you who have the materials, if you'll pull your facilitator guide out, we're going to go on a little scavenger hunt just for a few minutes. So you have a resource that Karen sent to you all. No, you're going to put it in the chat, right, Karen? I'm wrong about that. Karen will add that to the chat. So when you go into your groups, you'll have that scavenger hunt, but it just has a couple of questions on it for
What
you
is the guide?
to.
I'm sorry. I don't find the guide.
You don't find the guide? Okay,
No,
if you go to challengingbehavior.org, go to.
I got everything else, but not the guide. I don't know
Really?
where is the guide. Yes.
It should be in the little folder with all the materials. And it says facilitator's guide.
Yeah, I don't see that either. And I have it up on the other screen and I don't see the
I
the
have-
facilitator guide.
I have only a script one, session one,
In the reminder email.
role play.
Okay, maybe, Karen, do you have access to that where you could put the link to the facilitator guide?
Mine just says modules and kits for trainers.
Got it. Thank you. Never
Got
mind.
it?
Thank you.
Where do
Okay.
I go from the modules and kits for trainers? That's all my link says.
Okay,
And then I had a link for a positive solution for families action plan.
no, all right, that's what I sent you. That's an extra one, or that's what Karen sent out that we're going to use. So that's just extra.
Yes, that's where all the sessions, where the family handbook and everything. So yes.
Okay. All right. We'll try to put that link in there. If not, during break, I will pull it up and I can tell you guys exactly where to go. It should, the rest of you, did you have trouble with it?
Thank you. I don't find this stuff. I'm
Okay,
sorry.
I'll pull it up for you. So when you're in your groups, let's hope somebody has a facilitator's guide. If not, we'll come back together and we'll just talk about those. We'll do our own little scavenger hunt here. So it's fine. We'll make it work. Okay. So, and then I'll check because it should be a folder you download that has all that information in it. So I'll look to try to see what's going wrong there. Okay. So let me just show you the questions. So we're going to go into breakout groups. We're only going to do this for like 7 minutes. And that's a chance for you guys to kind of introduce yourselves to each other, say hi, good morning. And then I put on the actual, it's not on my slide, but on the actual scavenger hunt that will be in chat, it has the pages to look at. So when you look at the pages, you can just go to that page quickly. Karen put the that resource in the chat. Thanks everybody for helping find that. All right, so let's just try this. And again, if it's not working, somebody send me a message and we'll pull you out of your groups. You can still say good morning to each other and introduce yourselves. But we'll just come back and we'll just go through these because some of these things are important as we think about using these materials if we're doing parent groups, okay? All right, so Karen, if you don't mind putting everybody into groups. Okay, everyone, so you might not have had time to do that since we were having some issues with where the materials are, but I put this in chat. So I think where we're messing up on finding those resources is if you go to the challengingbehavior.org website, at the top, you'll see training and technical assistance. So if you click on that link, and then up under that link, you'll see trainers. If you click on trainers and then scroll down, you'll see preschool parents and click on that. And that has all of the materials for the positive solutions for families. So that's where you're going to get your facilitator guide and your, everything you would need if you were using these materials.
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
Yes,
Can you go through those
absolutely.
steps again? I'm on the
Yeah,
website now.
absolutely. So if you go to, and I put this in chat also, but if you go to challengingbehavior.org, and then at the top, you'll see training and technical assistance. So if you click on that, then you'll see trainers, click on trainers, and then scroll down and you'll see preschool parents. And if you click on that, it has all the materials for positive solutions for families. Does that make sense? Anybody have questions?
It makes sense, but it has that zip file
Yeah,
and it says it's downloading. I don't know how long it takes to download.
it doesn't take too long. 'cause
Okay,
they-
mine is taking forever.
Is it taking forever?
It will take a few minutes. Yes.
Okay.
Oh,
So-
it says opening in 3 minutes. So hopefully,
Okay, yeah.
thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, if you don't have them, it's okay, because we'll be all right. Okay, but if you can download them, that's great. Okay, let's see. All right. Thank you, Roseanne, for putting that in there. You put the link, which would have been easier than putting all the directions. So, all right, let's kind of keep going here. So let's talk about this for a minute. So if you had somebody in your group who had the facilitator guide, were you able to answer any of the scavenger hunt questions? So let's just start with the first one. What skills should facilitators of positive solutions for families have? Any group able to look at the guide?
Our group didn't have any facilitators guide.
Okay,
We weren't able to do the scavenger hunt.
okay,
We
Our
had
group-
one, have the download, and it was personal contacts and having flyers, reminders. There was incentives, make it relevant, childcare, and convenient times.
yeah. So that's more things we need to think about if we're going to do sessions, right? So with a facilitator, it's, you want somebody who's pretty comfortable with kind of supporting diverse families and kind of has that strengths-based approach to families and kind of understanding of the social emotional piece and just those skills for facilitating groups, right? Because we know that sometimes is hard to do that. So if you have somebody who's more comfortable with that kind of thing to start it off, then that really helps. So as far as how many facilitators are recommended, did anybody have that?
I saw 2 facilitators are recommended.
Yeah, 2. So, and I saw some of you holding that up. And, you don't have to have 2, but it makes it a lot easier if you have 2. Not only the fact that if something comes up and one person can't be there, but it's just nice to have that support of 2 people facilitating the groups. If it's a smaller group, you might not want to have 2, but it is nice when you can, if you have the resources, and I don't just mean money, I mean people too, to have 2, it's nice to do that. So what about having family members as facilitators?
They can be facilitators, but it's recommended that that family member has previously participated
Yes.
in the Positive Solutions for Families group.
Yeah.
And the content and how things are to be facilitated.
And it's so powerful. I mean, if you've got a family member who's been through it and they're excited about it, man, that's so powerful to have a family member's voice, and even recruiting wise, right? When you have that family members who's co-facilitating it. So that if you can work that out at all with sessions, then that's huge. It just makes a big difference. What now, and I lost your name. So the person who did the recruiting participants. So you did a great job of kind of going through those things we would think about, right? Like, how are you going to advertise it? Are you going to have incentives? And incentives, a lot of times just depend on the resources we have available to us, or even if you use the materials for family night. What kind of resources would you give away? Or, some of the things, if you look at the facilitator guide that have been incentives, some people have done something like a raffle ticket that's given away the last day. So you kind of encourage parents to participate. Like if you've participated in each session, Then there's some kind of giveaway at the end. Some people have done, like gift cards, not with a lot of money, but little gift cards or, children's books, just different incentive kinds of things for family, gas cards, those kinds of things that might make it a little bit easier for families to come. Okay. So one of the things I wanted to mention too, with how for us to think about across today, when you think about if you use this as sessions, how would you advertise it? Once you get going and you have some parent quotes or family quotes, that's also a great thing to add into your advertisement. What are families saying about it? Because that's going to encourage people to want to come to these groups also. But there are also those things that, that will, can you do childcare? What about transportation? What's a convenient time, which is really hard to figure out. And some people will do dinner and then the session. So the parent or family member or caregiver comes with the child, they do dinner together, and then you provide childcare, and then the parents or family members go into the session. But again, we have to think about resources around that. So how long are the sessions planned for? Did anybody get that far?
2 hours.
2 hours.
2 hours?
2 hours. Okay. Now, so how did you feel when you saw 2 hours?
That's very long to me.
Yeah.
It's very long.
It is. The reality is, right, that's hard. I mean, it's hard to find a convenient time for families to come for 2 hours, right? So, again, there's room to play with that. So a lot of people have done, when I told you, a lot of places who've done the groups have done that dinner, for 30 minutes, and then do an hour session. Or an hour session, if that's what seems to work for your families. So lots of flexibility with things we want to think about how to do it. The problem becomes, even with 2 hours, there is so much content. How do you get through all the content and keep families engaged and wanting to come back, right? So we want to kind of think about some of those ideas. And again, those of you who have use the materials, if you would kind of share the kinds of things that have worked when you've done it, that can be really important too. And then what's the most important thing to remember about the PowerPoint slides that are provided?
That we're facilitators of the group, not trainers.
Yeah. And it's easy with those PowerPoint slides because they're very engaging and kind of colorful, to slip into more of a training as opposed to a facilitated leading discussion. So you really want to think about how you might use those materials, because most of us like those visuals of being able to see that, right? So just think about, and in the facilitator guide, it even talks about seating, because a lot of times we've just done in a circle, because that helps it not feel like a training also, right? So just think about seating and those kinds of things. And as far as activities go, you'll kind of see how the activities are as we go throughout the materials. Okay. So also, so you too long, the 2 hours, I was looking at trying to keep up with chat there. So yeah, that's a long time, and it's really hard to get families to commit to those 2 hours. So another thing I want you to think about, and some of you who have, if you've done the groups, if you could throw out ideas, and I don't know that there's a right or wrong answer to this, because we've done it both ways. But if you do the sessions, you also have to make a decision about, okay, those families that start at session 1, are we going to let other families come at different points in times? What if some of those families do get excited and they're saying, oh, this is really good, and we got these resources, and we got to take home these things. And you have some families that say, oh, can I come? So you really have to just decide how you want to handle that. And, one time when I did it in Urbana, we did just let parents come if they wanted to. And we ended up at the end with over 20 parents coming to this, just word of mouth of the families. One issue that comes up with that is a lot of times parents share things that we don't want to go outside of that group. And when you've got people coming in and out, then it's harder to build those relationships and that safety net of people feeling safe and comfortable with each other. So it's a trade-off, but that's something to think about also if you think about the sessions. That's a decision that will have to be made.
Do you think that that would be something that schools could do maybe at the beginning of the year and then towards the end?
Mhm.
To have an opportunity, and those who may have missed the first
Yeah.
could
Yeah.
come in the spring, we did it in
Yeah.
the fall and we
Yeah.
can in the spring.
And that's one way to do it, right? Because you build up that, I want to do this. I mean, they're really liking this, so I want to do this. So it's that automatic recruiting kind of thing. Yeah. Because that relationship piece, that safety piece is so important. Okay, a couple of things with the handbook that I want us to think about is the family handbook is great. So I know not everybody can see this, but if you downloaded the family handbook, it's got lots of activities, lots of resources in it. So another thing to consider is if you're doing the sessions, so sometimes people the very first night put the whole family handbook together, like either in a little notebook or just those little folders, that you can, that have the whole in them where you can put things in a folder, keep it organized. They give the whole thing to families. Other people, and I would recommend this, not doing it all the first night, because what if you don't use all those activities or all those materials? It gets confusing, right? So if you just provide some kind of notebook or folder, and then every session based on what you're doing, you give those handouts, then it matches up. Yes.
How does this correlate with being a parent educator going into homes?
You can
I'm a
use
bit confused.
Okay, no, when I say you've got lots of flexibility with how to use this, you could also use these same, not every single activity is going to fit for a home visit, but you can use the same materials and resources with families in the home. So I think as you see the content, as we kind of go across all the materials that are available to you in Positive Solutions for Families, you'll see lots of different ways you might use these resources with individual families. And that's why I don't want you guys to just think, okay, we have to do sessions, because there's some great parent resources in here that you can use.
I do have another question.
Okay.
The family guide you shown, was it the family routine guide?
No, that's
no.
a separate one. This is the family handbook. And that just has all the activities and some resources and things for the individual sessions. And you guys will see what I mean if you haven't done these before, if you're doing sessions.
Thank you.
When we get to the end, because when there's so much content, it's hard sometimes if it's going to be an hour to get through everything. So you got to pick and choose. Okay. All right, there's some more hands. Yes.
I was going to say that I think that this could fit very nicely into the goal setting for families. That's a part, especially of the expansion grant. But if that's something that we're, routinely talking to families about, this would be a terrific resource to use as a jumping off point for that.
Yes.
So not only, a session for your general population, maybe, but for those families that are specifically receiving those multiple home visits throughout a year, they might have some goal setting around routines that they want to talk with the family support team about. So I think that would be a way that it could work.
That's great. And that's what I want you guys to keep doing. Keep thinking of all the different ways that you might use them, but that's a great idea. Yeah. Anybody else? Was there? Is there another hand there? Okay. All right. So this is what I want you to say. I don't want this, I don't want you to think throughout, this isn't going to work for us. Tell me what you're thinking so we can kind of problem solve about that a little bit, or people can share other ideas. Okay. But these are just some examples of the handbook, but I would recommend just pulling out the ones for each session, and then, but do give them some way to organizing and keep it together, keep those handouts together. Okay. All right. So you also have, that was sent to you. This isn't part of the Positive Solutions for Families. I just put this for us to think about, is after we finish kind of just going through each session, so you have an idea of the content that's there and different ways we might use it. I just put this in here for you to kind of think about, are there thoughts about this section or things I want to remember about this section, or ideas that people shared that I really liked that I thought we could use? Okay. Or a parent cafe. Yes, Jennifer, that's a great idea. So parent cafes are another way that people have used these materials. That makes a lot of sense. Okay, great. You guys just keep sharing these ideas here. Okay, so let's jump into session 1. We're going to spend a little bit longer on session 1 than maybe some of the others, just because if you're doing the sessions, the session 1 is critical, because we want parents to really like it and come back, right? We don't want them to think, I don't want to do this, right? So what happens in session 1 is going to be really, really important. Okay. So if you have the materials in front of you, you will see this. But for each session, you have this sheet and it organizes everything for you. So let me, I don't want to confuse everybody here jumping back and forth, but in your facilitator guide at the very end, so we didn't talk about this, at the very end of the facilitator guide, there's 2 pages, and it lists all of the handouts, the extra resources that you need if you're running the groups, or that you might give to parents during that group. And all you have to do is click on that link and it takes you right to that resource. So it's very organized. You don't have to go hunting for things. They're right there for you. Okay. And then with each session, it tells you exactly the materials that you're going to need if you're facilitating the groups or family members that you want them to have. Okay. So just quickly here, if we look at kind of that first session, what kinds of things are we wanting to accomplish? So obviously kind of meeting each other, the purpose of these, what these groups are going to be around, just ground rules that they come up with, not us, but they come up with. And then families' roles in supporting social emotional development and the importance of building relationships. So as I just kind of briefly show you this content, I want you to think about, what's your hook? Like, what's going to hook families in to want to come back? So as we kind of briefly go through that content for this first session, I want you to think about it from your perspective of how you might use these materials, but also through the eyes of a parent, family member, caregiver, whoever that is that might come to a session we're doing. Okay. So think about both of those, because we're going to come back to what's your hook. How are you going to get and keep families excited about that? Okay. So let me just kind of show you some of the pieces here. So in your script, and I know not everybody has this downloaded, and that's fine. I just want to point out something. So this is not on your PowerPoint slide. that you have in your materials, but in your script, it talks about that during our time together across these 7 sessions, these are the kinds of things that we're going to talk about and how we help our children do these things. So feeling competent and confident, building relationships, following directions, beginning to manage emotions. That behavior is communication. So what are they trying to tell us through their behavior? And then what are some skills, some strategies, some resources that we can use to help them learn new skills so they don't have to use that behavior? And then most importantly, just feeling loved, safe, and special. So I wanted to highlight this from the script and just share something that I've done when I've done the groups that's really worked well. And that is to put this on poster paper, these like feel competent, confident, just that little list. And every single time it's posted. So whether you do this virtually or you do it face to face, it's posted. And we always go back to that, even at the end of the session, to kind of highlight, okay, these are the kinds of things we said we were going to talk about, learning how to support our child around these things. So what kinds of things did we do tonight or whenever you're doing these sessions, right? And what I found is that the more you do this and you keep linking things together, the more they were seeing the links. And even the last session, one time, I divided the families up and they took some of these areas like building relationships, managing emotions, feeling competent and confident. And they talked about the things that we had talked about and learned from each other over the 7 sessions. And they came back with just these great ideas and strategies of things that they were doing. So that's just one idea, but it has been a nice way to get parents kind of focused on the content you were covering. Okay, so this just with families, you're kind of sharing with them about the different sessions, what the content is. And there's always kind of a what's happening today, right? So obviously part of that first session is going to be just getting to know each other, right? And it says the first positive thing that comes to mind about your child or children. And that's there, it kind of ties into what you guys were saying earlier about the positive part. But a lot of times people think that these groups are just about behavior. And that's why a lot of families will sign up for these groups, is the behavior part. So we want them to see that it's bigger than that when we do some of these other strategies and when we have a positive relationship with our child, it helps with those behaviors. So that first positive thing that comes to mind, and then, what brought them to this group? What did they want to get out of it? Now, if you don't have the script, it's fine. I just want to point this out because the reason I'm pointing this particular purpose out is because it really talks about that this group is for those families, right? And that just the reality of when you're living with young children, that you experience every emotion in the book, right? From joy and laughter to exhaustion and frustration. And that's we all do that. So because we want people to feel comfortable, we want them to know it's not always easy, for sure. So we know that most young children are going to experience challenging behavior at some point. But there aren't easy cures, magic potions, or those kinds of things. We're just going to really talk about some strategies that we know. We have evidence that these strategies work and they've been successfully used by families and children. So you kind of want them to know up front that this group is for them. Okay. Ground rules they come up with, and because that, and I think one of the biggest ones is the cell phones. And almost always a family member will say, well, let's just decide we're going to put our cell phones on silent and put them away. So it comes from them, but just that part around being present in the moment and just being respectful of each other. And as we start to develop those relationships, know that it's safe to talk in that environment. It's safe to share those kinds of things you might be struggling with as a parent, and just being respectful that we all have different values and customs and cultures and just the way we grew up. And you guys have seen this activity a million times in a million different trainings and things you've done. But I think it's an important one to get people to realize how important they are. So just thinking about that important person in your life and how that person made you feel. Who was it? How'd they make you feel? Because the point here is we want them to see how important they are to their child. So that's one of a thread that goes across this is just how important they are. We want them to be that champion for their child. And then kind of this whole idea around connecting with your child and how important that is, and really starting to change people's idea about quality versus quantity of time. And because a lot of times in these groups, people think that it has to be a lot of time, and they just don't have that time. So it just doesn't happen. So being able to have some of those conversations. Wait, where can I find this? What is that? It's in session 1.
Is that in the facilitator's guide?
No. In your materials, it has each session with all the materials that go with each session.
Trainer or script?
Yeah.
Can you say that again? I'm sorry.
Yeah. So when you download the whole Positive Solutions for Families under the trainer part, it'll have each session and it'll have PowerPoint and script for that session.
Yay, I found it. Thank you all.
Good. Yeah, and thank you. And again, don't hesitate to say, wait, where is this? Okay. And I know time-wise, it's not like we can go through all of this, but I do want to just, so that material's there for you, right? So this next part is connecting with your child. So thinking about what are the benefits of doing that? And now think time-wise again. Because we're all kind of thinking, okay, 2 hours may be too long. I don't know if I can keep them here for 2 hours, but I could probably get them here for an hour. Or if we do dinner before or offer childcare or those kinds of things, right? So just having some conversations around what are some of the benefits of spending time with your child, and just thinking about being more connected, increasing their competence and confidence. Children love it when we give them attention and time. And then what are some of those barriers? So realistically, what are some of those barriers? I have other children. I don't have a lot of extra time, or I'm working and I come home and I got to get everybody fed and bathed and in bed, or, those kinds of things. Or I'm just too stressed at the end of the day and too tired to play. So really problem solving some of those kinds of things. And that whole idea around that it doesn't have to be a lot of time. Every interaction's a connection, right? So really thinking through some of those small moments that happen across a day, even if they walk their child to the school bus, that's a great time to sort of have some of those interactions and make those connections. So you'll see throughout that there's some apply it and try it. We don't want them to think it's homework. It's just, okay, these are some things we've been talking about. Then you go try it, right? And just see what happens. So this says name 5 things. Just be careful with that one too, because we don't want them to think, oh my gosh, wait, I don't have that much extra time and now I got to do all this extra. So it doesn't have to be 5 things. You could just take that out. You would, but there's a handout. And we want them to just think about some times that they could connect with their child. Now, we want to have discussions around when we talk about it can be just if you have a small amount of time. Maybe it's reading a book together. Maybe it's taking a walk together. Maybe it's cooking something together or eating dinner together or, a hug, a high five. Those kinds of things support those connections, right? So we want to try to reinforce that. You don't have to have big chunks of time to make those connections with your children. So this isn't quite as overwhelming when you think about those kinds of things, right? Okay. So then you'll see why I'm taking a little bit longer on this one. There's these powerful practices in here. And in the first session, we talk about being encouraging, being positive. And there's some tips for doing that. So you can see the tips that are here. But when there's powerful practices, sometimes there's a role play that goes with this. So I want you guys to kind of think about this one. And we're not going to do a breakout group with this. We're just going to talk about this one. So if you look at the role play, so if you have the materials, if not, it's okay. I'm going to tell you what it is. Okay. So there are like 5 different scenes. But has anybody ever said, oh, pick me, I want to do a role play? Whether it's been in a training or a group. So I want you to think about the fact, this is the first night we've come together. And it's like, I'm trying to be comfortable in this group. I'm trying to figure out, wait, what's going to really happen in these groups that I'm trying to figure out how to find time to do this, right? For my child. So when you think about these role plays, any of you who have done this first session, if you have ideas that you could share, please do that. But what I want to do first is, if you have the materials printed out, you will see the sample role play cards. So I'm just going to read a couple of them to you. It's going to get volunteers, but I think at this point, you'll see what I'm talking about. So the first one, I'm just going to read a couple of them to you, is, so you would, if you had volunteers, you would have somebody being the mom, somebody being the child. So mom is doing the dishes and her child's putting toys away. She doesn't look at the child because she's seen what they're doing. And she just says, I like how you're cleaning your toys. The child doesn't look up or seem to hear, right? So if you go back to these, like getting your child's attention, be specific, say what you see, right? So they're just little tips. But if I just read that role play versus acting it out, it's much more powerful when you act it out and you see that the child doesn't even notice they've even said anything to them, right? Or let me show you another one. Okay, so mom and child, and some of these are dads, so I'm not, or grandpa's watching TV and grandchildren are playing together nicely. So the grandparent stops watching the TV and looks at the children and says, good job. And the children look confused and continue playing. That's an example of that specific part, right? So do you see what I mean about if we read them, they're not as powerful as if you see it in front of you. So a couple of ideas. We often, if you've got 2 facilitators, this first session, you just act them out. Or some people have videotaped ahead of time examples of these, and they just show the videos. So you're not asking somebody to role play at this point. So any other ideas or thoughts on that? Because they really are. And we've had parents say, wow, I never thought about that. These are like little steps that have a big impact, right? So just like getting their attention, being more specific instead of saying good job, but telling them good job for what? Those things that we know, but sometimes as a parent, you don't know that. So what are some of your thoughts or ideas around this first session and role playing?
Well, I like the idea of doing it ahead of time.
And then you just have them, right? I mean,
Have teachers, in your school, then you can just kind of discreetly go in while they tell them, hey, today I'll come in during this time, and you can interact with the kids, and you can use those examples. The kids won't really know what's going on. So
Yeah.
that if you have that, those teachers that will be willing to help.
yes. And think about, let me go back to slide here. So these role plays represent examples of these powerful practices that we're talking about that parents can use, right? So you really do need to think through either, even if you don't have 2 facilitators available, if for that first night, somebody else comes just to help do these, if you don't have them recorded. Okay. Any other ideas, or those of you who have actually used the materials? And you may have used the materials in a different way and not in a session, but just kind of thinking about those role plays. Okay, so you'll see in some other, not in every session, but there are some role plays, and they really can be powerful. And again, just to reinforce, we've had parents over and over say, wow, when I saw that, I was just like, I do that all the time. I never thought about that, right? And it's just a little thing you can make changes about. Okay, so if we go back, we've got 2 apply it and try it's here. So that first one was just thinking about times that you can connect with your child. And this one is giving those positive comments to your child. So, thinking about a time during the day, and it gives an example of putting on her shoes, but what can you say to your child? Those positive comments. So again, you got to have time to kind of practice these kinds of things and think about what that would look like. What would it sound like? And then encouraging statements, just how. And if in the script, it ties it back to behavior, because we know that's important to families and it's why they often come. Any opportunity we have to tie the things we're doing back to a child's behavior, parents are more likely to come back, right? Because they want more. So this just gives lots of examples of ways they can be positive and encouraging with their child. So one thing, this is an extra. One of the things that we have found is that if you do a make and take, or at least a take every time, something families leave with based on what you talked about, they were so much more likely to go try things out and come back and get excited about, what was going on. So one of the make and takes for the first session that we've done is just have a whole set. I mean, literally, and they're cuter than this. I just put this in here for an idea, but like just laid out on a table in the back of a room, and it'll have just things like bake cookies, go for a walk, draw a picture, read a book, play a game, different things they can do with their child. And they'll just take a couple of those because it gives them, again, that reminder of it doesn't have to be a huge amount of time. I can just think about times during the day when I can connect with my child. Another thing that people have done for this first session is to see if you can get books donated and just have a book. So families can choose a book and then they take that book with them, because that's such a fun way for them to connect with their child. So those are just 2 ideas. Anybody else have other ideas, kind of thinking about that this first session, this whole idea around how important they are to their child and finding moments to connect, even in the car, like, or on a bus, like those opportunities to connect, as well as those positive and encouraging comments.
I think it's helpful too, when we make suggestions like this to families, that we kind of guide an understanding of what it could and should look like.
Yes.
So for instance, like playing a game where you would, kind of illustrate to them maybe some appropriate games, rather than like
Yes.
your child is not going to sit down for an hour and play shoots and ladders.
Right.
Everybody's going to be mad and it's not going to work out. So, like showing them an adaptive use of Uno cards,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
early learning tip sheet on how to read a book, or things like that, so that they really kind of get an idea of what it looks like to do these things with a 3-year-old that might have some behavioral challenges.
Yeah. And, that's such a great idea. And even going for a walk, right? Because you know how a 3-year-old is going to, well, a lot of them are going to stop and check out everything. And often we try to rush them along. And so even just talking about that, about the importance of slowing down, we only have this amount of time, we're going for this walk. So it's okay if we don't get very far outside or those things. So that's an excellent point, is really demonstrating some of this. So yeah, helping parents learn about heavy work before heavy demand. Yeah, Roseanne, great comment. So that's a great idea. And tell me how to pronounce your name. Kevy, is that?
Yes, it's
Is that
Kevin.
right? Okay, Kevin.
Mhm.
Okay. So think about too, though, the challenge of, we went through this quickly, but there's a lot of things happening in this first session that are going to take time, right? And talking about them. So we got to think about how we can, and I think that's one of those things about the role plays. Maybe one of those role plays becomes role playing one of these ideas, or reading a book together, or going for a walk, where you're kind of demonstrating that in there. How can you work in some of these examples to make it more powerful and meaningful for families? Okay. So the two things they're going to do are that connection and the positive comments and encouragement. Okay. And there's also a handout, and this is just on page 12. You don't have to look at page 12 in your script, but it talks about this on page 12. And this again is just to give families some different ideas of things they might say, because for a lot of families, this whole idea around positive comments and encouragement is new, right? They just hadn't thought about it like this, or they didn't have somebody kind of doing that with them, or still don't. So just really talking about, again, what's that look like? What's it sound like? What are some things that you could say? And then also just those nonverbal things, like the giving a hug, or just smiling, or doing a happy dance together, those kinds of things, right? Okay. So thinking about this session, what's your hook? You kind of know the content of this first session. You got to do things like getting to know each other a little bit, right? But how do we make them feel important? And how do we make them see how this group is going to really give them lots of strategies and ideas, and then they can share the strategies and ideas and things that they're doing also?
Well, I just, from a parent's perspective, I think that the hook is just what you said, having parents to see how important they are, first of all.
Yes.
And how important their connection with their child is. And then just on down the line, the benefits and the barriers of connecting, being realistic, asking their opinions and their experiences, make it personal, and then how they try it and apply it, have them practice and think about it. So I think just the whole thing in one, those steps can be the hook to get the thing.
Yeah. But yes. And I got to be really conscious about we want them to know how important they are to their child. And you don't always get that message as a parent, when you're doing the day-to-day. So, and that part that you said, I think is so important too, about being realistic. We're not just going to say, okay, spending time with your child is really important. We want to have that conversation around what's the reality of your life? How can you find a few moments to connect and know that those few moments are so powerful? Okay, some of you, okay, so let's see. Jennifer or Stephanie, I was looking at, Jennifer said, I often give families easy scavenger hunts as activities they could do with their child. That would be such a fun, easy kind of take away from that first one of the ones that you could do. That's a great idea. And then, and then Kevin put the Illinois Early Learning. Yeah, because they've got great tip sheets for families. You can so easily work those into these sessions also. And then let's see what else we have here.
Can I,
yes, go ahead.
sorry, I don't mean to interrupt.
No.
But the scavenger hunts, I did use that over spring break. So I made a family scavenger hunt, just so they're making, and I wish I had these handouts so I can give it to them like after the scavenger hunt. That would have been perfect.
Yeah.
But I can use it in the future.
Mhm.
So I did it over spring break for them to be engaged with them. And it would be like pick out a yellow leaf. It was very simple things that didn't require additional resources. So it's like everyday things in the house, like find a spatula, use a spatula, like bake cookies, find some twigs. And then last night I hosted a family reading night. And we're making those positive connections. And these handouts would have went hand in hand with that. But I wish I would have took the time at the end for the parents to give their feedback to one another. But that's something that I can use in the future.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I think that's true of all of us, right? There are always little pieces. I mean, we're doing all these great things, but we can make it even better. I mean, we keep trying to think of things and that make it work for our range of families also. So I think that's great. Okay. So let's, so anything in particular, and you may have just mentioned it like in your comments, but what about just this session in general, this first kind of making the connection? Anything in particular that you want to make sure you remember, or just thoughts that haven't already come up?
I can share.
Okay.
I really like the was it the script? Let me just open it just to make sure, where it has the examples of like ways for them to like make connections to the way they're saying. So like the powerful practices, like I can picture like this being like an activity where they, change the wording from put on their shoes to like awesome job putting on your shoes. So like teaching them how to change their language to use it in a more positive way. I think that's a really good like in class activity to do as a model.
Yeah. And there's actually a handout a little bit later on that does that again, you could pull it into this one if you wanted to. So these aren't set up where you have to do it in the order, that it is. You have that flexibility. So yeah, that's a great idea and thought.
And I know there was this lady that mentioned that ways that we could apply some of these things to the home visits. This could be a great follow-up, to those things that Stephanie just mentioned, giving them those examples of how to use that language, and then we can follow up with them, how many visits we're doing. Hey, have you been able to use, what we talked about the last time? How's that helped you, continue to build those relationships and connections that way too?
Yeah, I love it. And that would be so important on those home visits too, to kind of promote that, how important you are. And then those moments of connecting and positive encouragement, right? Yeah. Love it. Okay, so it's already 10:18. So we've made it through session 1, but let's do our 15-minute break now before we start into kind of 2 and 3. And then because we've got that hour lunch break. So since time's kind of going quickly here, let's take our 15-minute break, come back, and we'll jump back into 2 and 3. And thank you guys so much for all the participation. I love it. All your ideas are so great and thoughts. So I'll see you in 15 minutes.
I do have a quick question. Is she here?
Oh, yes, I'm here.
Okay. I think, can you tell, I have the family handbook now.
Okay.
The facilitator's guide,
Okay.
positive solutions for families workbook,
Okay.
introduction to the pyramid model.
Carrie asked about lunch. So we're going to aim for 11:45 to 12:45. Okay. So one thing, I know that we get tight on time here because of all this material, but I did want to share one thing I thought about over break that we've done on home visits as well as in these groups. I mentioned kind of that importance of thinking about how we can help parents know how important they are to their child. And one of the things that we did was, the bucket books where, filling somebody's bucket versus draining somebody's bucket. So that one fits really well into that first session about those positive and encouraging comments and the power of those versus when we're not being as positive and the message that sends. So we got those little, at Target has that little dollar section right when you walk in the door. Every time they have buckets, we just go ahead and get a bunch of buckets because these work on home visits also, but we gave each parent one. And then each week we would give them a little drop for their bucket. So that's another advantage of having 2 people, 2 facilitators, because you can have someone really paying attention to some positive thing that you can, that positive drop you can give that parent. So they leave with a positive drop that's just for them. And we always did that on home visits too. So you don't make a big deal out of it. You just put that little positive drop for them. So it's a great way to support their competence and confidence every week in that group.
When you mean drop, what do you mean?
Okay. Thank you for saying that. So have you ever heard of the bucket books, like a drop for your bucket? So the whole premise behind that is when we say those positive, encouraging things to people, we're filling their bucket. When we say negative things, whether it's we're saying them or it's our expressions or, it drains their bucket. And so we're wanting them with those positive and encouraging comments to fill their children's buckets. So we want to fill their buckets. So often, like if you look on that website for the bucket books, it'll give you a little, you can download these drops like raindrops. So we would take those drops and then you would fill that parent's bucket with those positive drops, positive, encouraging comments that we then hope they will then also use positive and encouraging comments with their child. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. So
Yeah.
that's just an idea, that you can use to kind of be really intentional about that. Okay. Yeah. So, and Carrie had said earlier, so this may be just getting them excited about those resources also. Okay. Oh, fill a bucket book. Thanks, Karen. So Karen put that resource in there. Okay, so let's keep going here. So this next section is on keeping it positive. So we're going to keep kind of what we were doing in session 1 going here and making those connections for families too. So you have, again, this very organized way of thinking about, okay, these are the primary learning objectives here. So really with this one, it is about playful interactions, but really just about having fun in those everyday things that happen. with families. And then we're going to try to link that building relationship piece, the positive comments and encouragement and play to how that, can affect a child's behavior. Okay. Then we're going to get a little bit into why children do what they do and that positive language again. So that thread runs throughout, and then it tells you kind of what materials you need for this session. So you'll also notice in your script, if you're using that at the beginning of every session, when it has this what's happening today, it also talks about like the linking, what we did before with what we're going to do. So kind of talking about how, when you strengthen that relationship with your child, that it makes it easier to teach your child new skills and behaviors. So where they just kind of know what's happening here. All right, this is an important piece I want to point out. In the family handbook, there is a sheet that they fill out, or we want them to fill out every time, around kind of this whole idea of what happened when they tried these things, right? So remember last time they were doing the connecting, trying to find more time to connect with their child, and then those positive, encouraging comments. So this is that opportunity where we're talking about what happened. What did you try? What happened when you did that? The thing I want to point out here is that if families didn't have time to do that, we don't want them to feel bad about it, because they're not going to come back, right? I mean, they're going to be like, oh my gosh, I didn't have time to do this. I can't go. So we want to be really clear that it's okay if you don't have things written down or you didn't have time to try it. The more they hear other families talk about what they did, the more excited they get about trying it. So usually it all works out, but we just don't want them to feel bad if they didn't get around to trying those things. Okay. So the second part of that is these affirmations. So there's every single time there is a little activity sheet in the family handbook that gets the family to reflect on, something they did the last week that they feel really good about, or something that they tried that they feel really good about, and write a positive comment to themselves. And, that whole idea around, how that can be really encouraging and motivating, and that there actually is brain science that shows that when we use those affirmations, that they really are helpful for us just individually about feeling more competent and optimistic about things in our life. But we also know that a lot of families, well, a lot of us in general aren't used to doing that. So that's really hard for families to do. So again, we want them to, you can write something down, or you don't even have to write it down. Just think it in your head. I mean, something that you worked hard on last week, that you worked hard on encouraging, give yourself that pat on the back there. Okay, let's see. I'm trying to follow these. We give our families a positive affirmation cards every week. Oh, I love that. So they actually do little positive affirmation cards, which would be very similar to that, a drop for your bucket, right? It's that same kind of thing, those positive affirmations. But just to point out, this is hard for a lot of people to do. So it can be a little uncomfortable for people in the beginning. But what also has happened in the groups that I've been part of is towards the end, parents start just supporting each other with all these positive comments about things that they've been doing. So that's kind of a fun thing that comes out of taking the time to do that. Yeah. Okay, so it does encourage and support us as we grow and learn too, right? And so, those positive affirmation cards you can get from Amazon, and they did them for children also. So that's a great one. Okay, so want to show you this part. this is in the script, so it's actually not in your PowerPoint if you're using the PowerPoint slides, but you've probably seen this video because it was on the news, and then it's been on YouTube and Facebook and every place. But just show you a little bit of this, but think about what's the main point here. Yes, it's positive affirmation, but think about the other point of this.
Finally, the 3-year-old who is definitely America Strong. It's the moment moving so many. The simple walk to school, the 3-year-old named Aeon, wearing his backpack and remembering the words his mother taught him at just 2. What he says to himself over and over again.
I am smart. I am blessed. I can do anything. I am smart. I am blessed. I can do anything. I am smart. I am blessed. I can do anything.
That's his mother, Alyssa. She and his father, Alpha, have been telling their little boy for some time that he will grow up to be anything he wants to be. This was one of their first lessons more than a year ago.
Did you say I am smart? I am smart. I am blessed. Blessed. I can do anything. Anything.
He'll get there. 1 year later, now 3 years old, declaring this.
I am smart. I am blessed. I can do.
So it's a fun example to use about the power of those positive and encouraging comments with our children, right? And when you think about the main point there, while yes, it's an example around this positive and encouraging comments, but it also goes back to how important they are and the way they interact with their child and how much their child loves when they get their attention, right? Which then ties right into this next section here. So, all right, I keep throwing these little things in here, but just to point out, it is really important. This is in the script, but what we found is that because parents, a lot of family members sign up for these groups because of behavior. They see the behavior in the advertisement and they're like, oh, it's like going to a conference. There's a session on behavior, it's jam-packed, right? So we want to make sure that they don't get discouraged, that they're seeing how important the things we're talking about link back to behavior. And that's what this little section in the notes really, like before we start this, let's just slow down a minute and think about, you might be surprised that we're spending time talking about these things, but we're going to link how all these things really support children in, around behaviors. And so we want them just to hang in there, and we're going to show them how all these things tie together. So you address it right up front. All right, so Heather put, one of my family does affirmations with their 2-year-old every day. His face absolutely lights up. Exactly. It's that power again of how powerful that is and how important they are. Okay, just time-wise, I'm going to just go through this quickly to kind of show you what's here. But because in your script, there are lots of ideas again and examples of these kinds of things, and getting families to think about the things that they're already doing. And there's a role play in this one that I want us to take a second and look at also, because it's probably one that more parents have even commented about. So just thinking about those fun and everyday moments. And again, what are some of those powerful practices that we can do, like following your child's lead, or talk about what your child is doing, and, really, again, encourage them. There's some things in here about avoiding those power struggles and just having fun in those everyday moments that happen. And that follow your child's lead can be harder than it seems, because to do that, we're really talking about the child to be more in control and the adult following the child's lead. So one of the fun things we've done around that one, because parents, when they come back, they'll talk about how hard it is to do that, and, it's like, if you have to just sit on your hands until you see what they're interested in or what they want to play with, and then join in with their play. But that's one that'll come up a lot as, like, man, that was kind of hard to do, right? So, okay. And again, you got lots of examples in there, but we won't do that. I'm just gonna, if you guys have the, and the reason I'm gonna change my mind about doing this is because it's a lot to read. So if you have access to the materials and you pull up session 2, role play 1, I just want to show you how this one's different from what was in that first session. So this scenario, role play 1, is about a child, Kenny, who's sitting at the kitchen table with blocks and toys, wild animals, and his mother's making dinner in the kitchen. So the premise here is like, he picks up a snake and says, roar. And his mother says, that's a snake, not a lion. What does a snake say? My snake roars. And then he says, roar, right? And she keeps correcting him. So, then he's like, do you know what mom says, do you know what a lion baby is called? Baby? No, they're called cubs. Lion cubs. How many lions do you have? He has 4 and he counts 1, 2, 3. And she's like, no, you missed one. So that little scenario kind of keeps going. And, he finally puts the toys down that he was playing with and starts kicking the chairs and throwing toys. And mom says, all right, young man, you're done with playing, puts the toys away. Okay. So what's different about this one? So after you do that, then you have a conversation kind of reflecting with the families on, what happened? How do you think Kenny felt? How do you think mom felt? What could Kenny's mom do differently there? So that sets it up for the second one, which again is Kenny and his mom, but it gives an example of that same kind of scenario, but handling that in a different way. So when you guys mentioned earlier that, Kevin, I think it was you who said that about being able to not role play, but show some examples of what it might look like to play a game, what it might look like to read a book, what it might sound like when you do those things. That's the difference in this one, because it gives that scenario, you reflect on it, and it makes sense because we want our child to learn certain things, right? So we're trying to get them to say the right name of the animal or count, So the second scenario, it just goes through that same thing, but just, having mom respond in a different way. And so, and you see the difference in the conversation. It doesn't stop. He doesn't get frustrated because he keeps getting corrected. And it ends up more like mom saying, because his child says, if you look down, his friend, the lion, taught him how to roar. So that goes back to the snake. So snake learned how to roar from his friend lion. And mom responds with, wow, he must be a pretty special friend for the lion to teach him how to roar. I bet you and roaring snake can help me stir the food. So grab the wooden spoon, they stir together. And he's like, and the child's like, he teaches all his friends how to roar. He taught me how to roar too. Listen. And then he roars and mom's like, oh yeah, I would love to learn how to roar. So again, then you're reflecting on how is that different from what happened before? So examples of how we just might tweak little things that we're saying in that moment that doesn't stop that interaction and those positive comments and encouragement for the child, and the child doesn't get as frustrated. Okay. So comments about that, thoughts? So again, we want to figure out how we're going to do that role play, right? And sometimes you have people, because we had a dad in one of the sessions that I did, and he would walk in the door and go, are we doing role playing tonight? I want to do role playing. He loved it. But we know that's not always the case. So really thinking through how you might do that, since those are powerful. So in this section, it also goes back to that part around social emotional skills and what we're, to better understand challenging behavior. It helps to think about these social emotional skills and how these help our children be successful, and sort of where our children are at around those, and how we can teach our children these skills, right? And just that a lot of times that focuses on learning ABCs, counting, learning how to catch a ball, but we don't always think about these social emotional skills. So just how important those are for school readiness. And then what happens when children don't have those skills? And that's when you get into some of these behavior kinds of things. So this is positive. We're in session 2, and we're already starting to get into some of the behavior pieces. Okay. So it just kind of goes through what are some of the things we know about behavior. Okay. And then behavior is meaningful and communicates a message. And I don't know about you guys, but when you do these kinds of things around behavior communicates, do you have family members that say, wow, I've never thought about behavior that way? Never heard anybody talk about the fact that my child's trying to tell me something. Anybody have those conversations?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Especially if they're raised a certain way, and they don't understand. I could just speak from experience, until I got into education, my mom never took the time to ask me anything, or she's like, look, I said we're doing this. So
it is. So for a lot of people, they've just never thought about behavior that way. So that's a huge aha. And, we even had one parent at the end of a session come up and say, my favorite thing about this is the fact that behavior communicates, because I honestly thought my child was just trying to drive me crazy on purpose, the behavior. And this really made me see, no, he's trying to tell me something. And I need to try to figure out what he's trying to tell me. That's huge. If they walk away with just that piece, that's huge. And that's another thing we can do on home visits also. But this whole next section just kind of goes into, why children do what they do, and just some examples of what they might be trying to communicate. And, that if they keep doing that behavior, it's probably because something about that's working for them, So we're starting to think a little bit about this part. Okay. So at this point, there is a handout in their family handbook, and it's an apply it and try it. But what you're trying to do is just get them to think about what's a behavior that they would like to see more of with their child. So it's just at that point right now. So, and those are just examples of typical kinds of things that might come up. I wish she would listen more, or, clean up, those kinds of things, and less of. So more of, less of. Okay. And then they're going to build on that piece. And it goes back to kind of keeping it positive again with the way we talk to our children can have a really big impact. So, that my child won't listen is a pretty typical one that comes up a lot. So, and families feeling like that they spend so much of their time saying, no, stop, don't do that. So those opportunities, again, to really engage in those conversations about that switch in the way we say things, to our children. And again, the message that sends and how that supports them in knowing what to do. Okay, let's see, trying to keep up with the chat here. Oh, the family handbook activities. Yeah. So these really help parents. So these are strategies. So thinking about, telling them what to do, making it clear so they understand what we're saying them. And this is that practice. So somebody brought up in session 1, kind of that how I might say things in different ways. So this is where they really practice kind of going through. So instead of saying it this way, how can I change what I'm saying? So it's more positive and it's more telling them what to do. And there's a activity for this where they really, you can see that little practice thing about, some of those typical kinds of things we say and how you might say it in a different way. And they're paired up with this one. But again, with support from the facilitators of how they might do that. And then they're going to try to switch their language for the apply it and try it. But you can see how this is a lot of information again, and you got to allow time for people to practice these things if this is new to them. So it gives them ideas of what this might look like and sound like. So again, more examples around this power of encouragement. So things to try at home. List the behaviors they want to see more of and less of, and then try to keep it positive. So they're going to try to switch the way they say things, keep it positive, as well as telling their children what to do. Okay, so that's kind of a quick review of session 2. Any thoughts or things that you want to remember, or things that kind of stood out about this one, or questions, or ideas? Again, kind of sharing those ideas of things that you thought of or that you've used before.
Just the point where you talked about how making those positive connections with your child has, has an effect on their behavior in a positive way. Just reminding them or showing them how that happens.
Anybody else?
I like the takeaways in the role plan. I'm definitely going to incorporate the role plan.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, and you see how powerful that role playing can be, right? Instead of us just talking about it, when they actually see it, it makes a huge difference.
And the engagement will go up too, I think,
Yep. Okay, but you also
I should say will increase.
Yeah. How we struggle with time, right? I mean, yeah, if you had 2 hours, but realistically, you probably won't do the full 2 hours if you're doing sessions. But anybody have ideas about some of these things that we've talked about so far that you might use, like on family nights or parent cafe or e-blast or those kinds of things?
I would just personally try to remind the parents to say stuff positively instead of negatively, like don't do this. I hear a lot of that at school outside before they get inside, and I go out there and say, yeah, let's have nice hands, or let's be more gentle, or something like that.
Yeah, trying to model those things too. Yeah, that makes sense. And that would be a good school to home link, something you could do with some examples in it. Okay.
Can I,
oh yeah.
Say my input. Sometimes we have a hard time having parents open up to us about behaviors.
Yes.
Especially sometimes like we see the behaviors at school, and it might not be seen at home, or just, it might be a typical behavior that a parent overlooks at home and says that's just how they are. But in school, when there's at least 15 kids in a classroom and the behaviors are sometimes disruptive, I was wondering if I can take these positive, keep it positive affirmations in school with the child, just like a one-on-one.
Yeah.
And see if that changes their behavior. Because sometimes it's really hard to get, the parents to come in, or, just open up about behaviors that they're displaying.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great idea. And I think that positive piece just in general can be so powerful. And you guys know that any of you who have, well, even from a teacher perspective, how hard it is, those conversations when you are seeing challenging behavior. And as a parent, how hard it is to hear that. And you do want to sometimes just, well, I don't see that at home. Or I think that's where those relationships become so important. We keep trying to strengthen those relationships so it feels safe to be able to say, yeah, we are kind of seeing those, or we're not seeing it at home, but we're seeing this and we're struggling with this. So there is more of that partnership, but those can be really hard conversations. And so I think the positives and that reminder to ourselves of, like when I'm communicating with that family who this child really may be struggling behavior wise, and and maybe at home also, that I'm also sending those positive notes home before I, address any of the other things. So even as a family member, I don't just see the negative about my child, but I know I see these positive strengths that my child has also. So I do think that's a hard one sometimes, but yes, Dina, I love that idea about kind of that what can we do when they're with us during the day, right? To support that. Okay, so what's 11 o'clock. So we got about 45 minutes here to get through a little bit more of this. Okay, so thinking about these, so I'm looking at chat right now. So thinking about these resources for parent education component. Yeah. So that's what I mean. There's so much in here and you'll see even more as we go. So, and then Sarah says this could be a good resource to have out during the back to school night or parent teaching conferences. That's great ideas. Link to monthly newsletters. That way parents do all have access to them. And, and remember that, again, that some of these resources in here, if you look on the challengingbehavior.org website, some of those are in several different languages, not just the English and Spanish like these. So great ideas. Thank you, guys. Okay, so this next one, okay, wait, Heather, when I was in a preschool classroom, she's a home visitor now, they used to give the kids behavior bracelets and they probably love those behavior bracelets, right? Okay, so this next one, behavior has meaning. So we remember last time, so we started with, they were thinking about a behavior they want to see more of, less of. Okay, so now we're going to kind of take that and build on that a little bit more while keeping that whole connecting with the child, that the positive and encouraging comments and how powerful that can be. Okay. All right. Let's look at this one. All right. Now, these are the facilitator materials. These are the materials if you were doing a session or that you could use on home visits also, but that you would want to have with you if you're doing those parts of this session. So, keep in mind that from a facilitator standpoint or from a program standpoint, once you make one set of these materials for yourself as a facilitator of the groups, you have those. And then just thinking about resource wise, what kind of resources do we have that we can provide these for the family members who are participating in these groups or on home visits, those kinds of things. But these are some of the resources, okay? And then some of the family materials. And again, some of these go through, you're just seeing the first page, they all have lots of writing on them. And I'm always hesitant about that, even for all of us, because we look at it and go, oh, you see all that writing and you think, I don't have time for that right now. And you stick it in a pile somewhere, right? And may or may not remember to go back to that pile. So think about with some of these resources that you might pull out different pages. Now, if you look at these resources, there are lots of pages with each one with like a sample rule sheet that's blank that they can use at home. So they're really good resources. But when we think about how do I make this meaningful for my group of families, this group of families, we want to really be thoughtful about that process. Okay. All right. So we're going to start off with those affirmations again, or apply it and try the reflections and then the affirmations. And then we're going to be behavior detectives on this one. So another fun thing, if you're doing groups, is, the dollar store has those little magnifying glasses. So when we do the parent groups with this, we give them all those little magnifying glasses to be behavior detectives, because it makes some of this fun. We're looking for clues. We're trying to figure out what our child's trying to tell us. So it takes some of that seriousness out of parents trying some of these things. Okay. So we're going to We're going to reflect on what happened with what they did last time and really promote that affirmation piece in some way. I want you to, we are going to do this is a little hard not knowing how many of you actually have the scripts. So, let me show you this first, and then we'll talk about it, since some people have scripts, some don't. So this really focuses again on behavior has meaning. So challenge behavior works, sends a powerful message, but this gets into the function. So, that what a child's trying to tell us. So think about this for a second. Look at it through the parent's eyes again, whether it's home visits or whether it's a group you're doing. So you're going to start this conversation around, when we're trying to come up with clues, when we're being a behavior detective, we want to look at kind of what happens before, what the behavior is, and what happens after, because that can give us some really good clues. So we don't have to necessarily have to use the words antecedent, behavior, consequence, but that is one way of getting clues. So, we want them to kind of think about their child's behavior and ask themselves, okay, what did happen? What the specific time of day, activity that was going on? Was it a transition? Those kind of things. What happened before? And then just to be able to even describe the behavior. So what did that behavior look like? So, they threw the crayons, they ripped up the paper, they kicked the chair, or, whatever that behavior might have been. And then think about what happened after. Okay. So we're just starting this conversation around trying to break this down a little bit more. Okay. So as an example, you tell your child to clean up, they cry and scream, and then you say they can have more time to play. This is where that huge aha comes in sometimes, where you start connecting, oh, wait a minute, I just told them they could have more time to play. So next time they're probably going to scream and cry again, right? Because it worked for them. So you start connecting some of these pieces together. And that's that part of, starting to be that detective. And Roseanne's right. Behavior is an expectation and doesn't need to be a reward, right? So, but I think the aha is when, as an adult, you start seeing how you're responding might be like keeping that behavior going there. Okay. So this behavior detective piece here, breaking this down a little. So this is where I really wanted you guys to kind of look at this whole scenario and how it breaks down in your script. So you have this scenario about Angelo and kind of what happens before his behavior. So Angelo's mother tells him that it's time for dinner, and she starts guiding him to the table to sit in his chair. And he falls on the floor. He's kicking and he's screaming and he's shouting, no. And his mother tells him to stop and tries to pick him up. He kicks her, so she sends him to his room, is the example. So then you're getting people to think about what happened before. And what does that tell you? All right, so mom was asking him to come to the dinner table. And then his behaviors in reaction to his mom saying that, right? Then you look at what did he do? So that's when he kind of had the meltdown and was kicking and screaming. So that let us know that, he was kind of really resisting that coming to the table, right? So if you have your script, you can follow along with this. And yes, Jennifer, he might have been busy playing and there wasn't much of a transition there. And that's what you're trying to get at. You're trying to put these clues together to kind of get at some of those kinds of things. And then what did he eventually get? Did he get his needs met? Do you think he might try that behavior again? And what can we take away from Angelo's story? So what do you think Angelo's behavior was trying to tell us? What was he trying to tell his mother? Okay. So kind of go through that scenario together that he was trying to get out of dinner. It's just our best guess here, right?
He still wanted to play and not do dinner.
Yeah. Yeah. And think of the things you could build off of that, the transitioning, all of that, right? So you can see how all these pieces start kind of coming together. So then there's this form that's a little different from the one they had before, where they're going to, again, try to be that behavior detective with their own child about some behavior that they're using. But if you notice, the form has, instead of just blank areas when you say what happened before, it gives them different things to think about that they could check. And then what happened after? And what do you think the child was trying to tell you through that behavior? So they're just building on that behavior detective piece. Okay. Right. Now, I want to throw this out here, and this is where you guys, I want you to kind of jump in here. So in section 3, when we're talking about this behavior has meaning part and being a behavior detective, there is also a section on timeout. So if you have your script, look at pages 7 through 9. And the reason this is in here is not that we're promoting timeout, but a lot of families use timeout. So it's in here to have a discussion, to have a conversation around, if you're going to use timeout, there's some things to think about, right? Because we know just that the importance of staying calm, how long a child is there. And so some interesting conversations can come up around this timeout piece. I will tell you that there are, sometimes people don't use this part. They just skip this part. But it often comes up from a family member as you're talking about this behavior, even if it doesn't come up here, it'll come up later when you're talking about different strategies that can be used. So I want to know what you're thinking. So tell me what you think about having this in here about timeout.
I do have families that use timeout, but they don't put them in timeout real long. And it seems to help them. They read the Calm Down Monkey book to them when they're doing timeout and doing the actions like yoga, breathe in and coming down, and the kids do it and it calms them down, and then they move on to the next thing. I mean, the parents do talk to them about what happened.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Let's see here. Oops. Wait, I have a lot of families that use timeout and do want to know if they're using it correctly, or it's great to talk about all these potential strategies so we can talk about the developmental aspects. Exactly. And then most people use timeout incorrectly. So I just want you to know that's why it's in here. It's in here not to shame anybody about using it, or some schools have said, but we don't use timeout, so we don't want to talk about it in these sessions. But again, we know that it often will come up whether the decision's made to use it or not. So it really is that time to have conversations around it, and as Roseanne was saying, to have that kind of developmental aspect around this. And some people have no strategies, right? So, it can be a really important conversation. And when just from my experience, some really good conversations come out of this. And that kind of, as you guys were talking about, Alexis, I don't remember it was you or who kind of said, sometimes that's all we know. I mean, that's the way we were raised. That's what our families did. And that's what we know. So sometimes just having these conversations and sharing strategies and ideas really just opens up it and gives families more tools for their toolbox when they're with their child. So that's why that's in there. Okay. All right. So then this kind of goes into household rules, because remember, we're kind of talking about behavior has meaning, and what are some strategies you can use, and how some of these things that we're going to talk about in this section are things that'll help your child and you have a better day, right? So the household rule part is always kind of a fun one, because a lot of times families will say, well, we don't really have rules. Because you can share the rules from the classrooms, right? These are rules that we're using in the classroom. But we almost all have rules, right? Whether we think about those rules or they're written down, almost everybody has rules. So that kind of comes up. So this, again, is that part about kind of keeping them simple for our children and developmentally their age. And, again, going back to that state the behavior you want to see and using visuals. So there are lots of different fun ways to do this. So think about the make and take again here. So this goes through some, rules like clean up after yourself. Would I know what to do? Use an inside voice. That whole idea around, we have to teach children what is an inside voice? What's it sound like? What's an outside voice? So, so they have in their head, they have the tools to understand what our expectation is. So this goes a lot into what our expectations are. And have we taught our child what these things look like? And are they written in a way that the child can understand it? So, it goes through some practice things too, like be nice to everyone. What does that even mean? Right. Okay. Speed up a little bit here. Just family rules. Then they kind of work together and come up with some family rules that they already have, or that they're going to kind of put down on paper here. So then there's examples about kind of teachable moments and teaching children what these rules look like. So just those learning strategies that we know we need to show and tell, but we need to practice. And then, how do we know that our child has it? So there's lots more information in here around the rules than I'm going over, which is what I meant about you just kind of have to spend time with these materials because there's so much here. But one of the make and takes that people have done is to give people an empty sheet and some visuals of just typical family rules that people might have. And so they can take those visuals to start a conversation with their child. And then a lot of people will take photographs at home of their child doing what you want them to do. So that's an important point that comes out in the script here, is having those visuals of the child doing what you actually want them to do. So one of the things, if you have the resources available, parents, because almost everybody has phones now, right? So if they take pictures of their child, so they figure out their rules, they take pictures of the child doing that, in the way they would like them to, and then they would send them to us and we would laminate them, and then they would have them the next time. But again, that's resource wise, what you have available, but it increased the chances that family used those and that they really thought about what their rules were and how they were going to teach their child how to do those things. Okay. So on this part, things to try at home. So observe your child using a challenging behavior, using that form that remember has the checkoff. What were they doing before? What was the behavior? What were they doing after? And then create a family rules chart or poster. Okay, so what are you thinking at this point? What do you want to remember of this section, or just your ideas and thoughts?
I wonder if it would also be helpful to talk about a little bit of the brain development with families and kind of connect it to, you know, a timeout might be helping your child to be safe so that then they can make choices, because when they're, you know, feeling unsafe and dysregulated, they're not going to be able to make a positive choice. And I'm not sure that all families understand that. I think they think sometimes the choice is the crying and the screaming and that sort of thing, and maybe reassuring them that that is typical in how children do communicate their wants and needs when they don't have another skill set to put in place.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, we're like zipping through this stuff, just time wise, but yes, I think that's so important. And that other part of that is that, you know, remember that first step was kind of staying calm yourself, which is hard to do sometimes in those situations. But even thinking about those conversations about how important that co-regulation, which leads to self-regulation piece is, you know, and how important they are in helping their child do that. And they're in the script, it talks some too about kind of if you need to take some time to calm yourself because of the power of staying calm. So yes, I think that would be really, really important to have that conversation. And not just to, if you're going to bring up time out, then you need to have the time to have that conversation and kind of how people are responding and support that. Let's see in chat here. Okay, like the behavior detective, they have so much fun with that, and then trying to go home and kind of figure out the little clues. So when they come back, that's really been fun for them to kind of talk about and share. So writing a list of behaviors that they want to change. Yeah, because it gets them thinking about that, right? And it's also important to understand that you can't change everything all at once. Yeah, that is so important, Heather. Good point. We want them, that's why we want them to focus on just one thing, right? Because we want them just to try one behavior. So that's really important, especially to feel successful about that. And yeah, that brain development piece is going to be huge. Like the behavior detective. Yeah. That's a really fun part of this one. Okay. And, you know, they really have fun when they come back, kind of thinking about this particular part here, this detective part, and what the clues, what they figured out. All right. So I want to do something quickly here, since it's we've got about a little over 15 minutes or so left here, because I want you guys to have time to talk to each other. So it's important to remind parents that the children's behavior, both positive and negative, of your child's ways of expressing something. And that's that part of how important that behavior has meaning. Behavior is communication piece is. And that you keep talking about that, right? You keep bringing that up because that's so important. Okay. So I want us to start this section before our lunch break. And then I want you to look at something quickly here. So we may go into breakout groups before lunch, because when we come back, we still have 5, 6, and 7. And session 5 is family's favorite session. So I really want us to be able to kind of talk about that one a little bit more. So not be rushed too much. So this next part is that the part that was added with this new addition around routines, which has been really received well by parents and families, as well as facilitators of groups. And this, again, is another piece that's great to share with families, like on home visits, you know, when we talk about kind of routines and the importance of routines. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to take a few minutes to look at the family routine guide in a second, but these are just some of the materials that you want to have available to you. And so there's some scripted stories as well as the family routine guide. Okay. And then the family materials for this one are really focusing on those transitions. And even if we go back to Angelo, it's a great way to tie this back in, just thinking about transitions and, you know, how even as adults, we don't like when somebody throws something on us all of a sudden, and we have to just immediately stop what we're doing and change to some transition. So some of these resources can be really, really useful. Visual supports, scripted stories, and then the routine guide. Okay. So let me tell you what's happening today. And then we're going to take a few minutes, Karen, to go into breakout groups, because I want you guys to look at that family routine guide for a second, have a feel for what that's like before we bring it up here. So it's introduced for the first time in this session, but then we go back to it at the last session. Okay. So I want us to be able to talk about that one for a little bit. So this one really is going to look at routines, why they're important, kind of what kinds of things support having a successful routine, and then prevention strategies. So this is when we're first starting. So we've been looking at behavior. So now we're going to look at some strategies for preventing those behaviors in the first place, and then some tips for transitions. Okay, so we're starting off with our affirmations again. So I'm going to just show you a little bit of this first part and get to the part where we're using that family routine guide for the first time. And we don't go into a lot of depth in this session with that routine guide, but I still want you to kind of be familiar with it. So, you know, this goes through the typical content around routines and why they're important. And then you get families to think of some of the names of, or name some of their daily routines that they engage in with their family. Okay. So again, we're zipping through everything, but think about you're having conversations with families. We're building those relationships. We're that environment where families feel safe and sharing things here. So after they kind of share, you have this list of possible family routines. And I think that point's really important about there aren't right or wrong routines here. And families they have really different kinds of routines that they're sharing. And, you know, that's okay, right? So we want it based on their family routines, not in comparison to somebody else's routines there. Okay. Yeah, and routines within routines. So there's so much you can do with all of this information. Okay. So after they do this, we want them to think about a routine that works really well for their child. And what is it about that routine that makes it successful versus that routine, you know, that's really difficult? And what makes that one challenging? And what might be the difference between those routines? So again, we're going to dig a little bit deeper into those things that might be happening. Going back to that behavior detective kind of thing, like what makes this one successful and what makes this one harder? Okay. So talks about, you know, some kind of those components of a successful routine. And we're going to go back to that from the very beginning part about that use of the positive feedback and encouragement. So that's going to go through every single one that we're doing, but kind of thinking about those steps. And then it gives some examples for breaking down the steps of a routine. So kind of that routine within routines, right? That instead of just saying, get ready for bed, there are lots of things that happen to get ready for bed, and how when you break it down, it helps your child be more successful and not get as frustrated, right? So what they do here is they think about that routine that's hard for their child. And they're going to try to break it down into steps. This is that one where you usually need to provide support in people doing this. So you can pair people up so they can support each other, but they usually do need help kind of breaking down that routine because they just hadn't thought about it like that before. So again, making sure that we have time to support families in doing that. And then we're going to also get them to look at the family routine guide. Now, I'm going to go ahead and put you guys, we've just for like, I don't know, let's just do, I don't know, 7 minutes, because I want you to kind of look at it, get a feel for it. And then I'll tell you kind of how it's used at this point. And I want you to think about, look how that, it's a great resource, but it's also really thick. Is that something you would give families? Or would you pull out different routines? Like if bedtime's tough, would you just pull out like the bedtime part for them? Or getting in a car always causes a meltdown. Would you pull out those kind of pieces? So think about those in your breakout groups as you look at this family routine guide and how you might use that. Okay, Karen, so if we can do breakout groups for about 7 minutes. Okay, so what did you talk about in your groups? What did you think about this particular resource before I kind of show you how it's used? Think about your families, think about how you might use it. What were the conversations?
We had one of our members give a great example of how they could use the family routine guide to, she applied it to the last scenario we had with the young man who didn't want to clean up after, clean up for dinner.
Yeah.
And she was just saying how parents can do well to include the child in the routine, get their thoughts about what they would like to do or, you know, would like to see if they're old enough to participate in that.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a good idea.
That's a great idea. And it's linking that information from the last session. You keep pulling these pieces together. So that makes that an even better idea. So anybody else, what were some of the things you talked about?
Well, I was sharing, I'm a family support worker. I don't spend too much time with kids, but I do family meetings. And at the beginning of the year, the teachers provides them a paper document with the routines in the classroom. And I keep encouraging parents to keep following, if it's possible, the routines at home. Because sometimes when the kids, for example, the weekend, if they don't have routine, they come back like Monday and the teacher starts struggling again with routines.
Yeah.
Same thing with after break, after long breaks, the kids tends to forget the routines. And I keep encouraging parents about routines.
Yeah.
This is what I do during my family meetings. And I always said, will be good. It's good to, this is like working together, teacher and parents.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
This is what I do.
What were some other things you talked about with this? I mean, do you think it's useful? What were some of the things that you thought about? Is this something you would resource-wise try to give parents the whole thing? Or what were some of those conversations?
No, I think I would give them the whole thing, so then they have access to everything. But what they wanted to specifically focus on at that time, we would discuss and focus on that. And then I would go back and incorporate some other links to what we previously talked about.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that pulling out, like focusing on one, because as Roseanne said, one of the things we found, it can be really overwhelming. Like if you hand somebody that resource, it's got so much stuff in it. It has great information, but it can really be overwhelming. So one of the strategies is like whatever they're working on, whatever that routine that's hard, then you give them that section. And then at the end, when we go back to this, in that last session, we've always just had some of them out. So if families want the whole resource, they can take it with them. A lot of them just want to take the sheets of the routines that are hard because it really can be overwhelming. So let's see.
What we,
Yeah, go
what
ahead.
we spoke out in our breakout group was that sometimes families and children are in survival mode.
Yeah.
So you have to like meet them where they're at.
Yeah.
So sometimes the information that we get is so, packed with ideas and resources that we want to give them. But at that time, that family and that child, just needs their basic needs met first. And then listening to that behavior and what they're displaying. So then progressively down the line, we can, bring them up to where they're supposed to be.
Absolutely. And I think that's that important part of kind of just knowing the families where they're at and what's best what is going to make the most sense and best support them, right? Because if we give it to them and it's so overwhelming, it's not going to be used anyway. So just it's a good resource, but just think about how to use it, how you might use it, right? So it's lunchtime. Okay. So let's take, we'll take an hour for lunch. And then when we come back, we'll finish up this section. I'll kind of show you how this is used. And then we'll go into 5, 6, and 7, which kind of pull these pieces together a little bit. So, and spin with the script. But if you think about, if we say things like, okay, let's say that dinner time is hard. That's a routine they bring up. So then we can't just say, okay, so that would be a great time to try offering more choices at dinner time. That's when we want to stop and have those conversations around, all right, what might be some choices that would happen at dinner time? You could sit next to daddy, or you could sit next to your sister, or you could choose which cup or which plate, or you could choose a beverage or a food, those kinds of things, or placemat. If you have placemats on the table, you could choose the placemats that we're going to use, So we want to help families think about, again, not just that strategy, but we're building their toolbox of strategies that they can use also. So what's it look like? What's it sound like? What are some examples? So there are lots of different examples within that script also. And then, as always, with these other pieces, there's always some tips for offering choices and things to think about because, sometimes you'll see like family, there are 4 or 5 choices and it's just too much for the child. So just having those kind of discussions around, like maybe just offering 2 choices or, kind of thinking about those things that, it's choices that a child likes, things that they like to do. So, and we're going to honor those choices immediately. If we're going to use that strategy, then we have to honor the choices, right? So the other part is kind of thinking about, again, like embedding those preferences. What is your child interested in? What's important to them, right? So let's say we have a child who getting ready for school is a real struggle every morning. So we know that he loves superheroes. So what his mom started doing was she would ask him which superhero he was that morning. And then she would call him by that superhero name. And she even had some clothes that kind of tied into his favorite superheroes to make getting dressed easier in the morning, because that was a challenge. It was a challenging routine. So she kind of took what he was interested in and then built on that to make that routine easier. And so then just getting families to think about what are those interests and preferences that your child has. And then let's try to think of some ways that you could tie that into that particular routine that's really hard for your child that would make that easier. And then just that whole idea, when we talk about prevention, consistency is so key, just in general. But, it's important that we try our best to keep those day-to-day routines consistent, and recognizing that's not always possible, but when changes happen, how important it is to be able to, talk to your child about that or change those visuals so they know that something's changing about that typical schedule. So again, think about what might be some good make and takes here that families would really like. And then transitions, that we know how hard transitions can be, and that's also one of those places that sometimes you see that challenging behavior. So having those conversations around the fact that transitions are part of the routines, and often children have many transitions in a day, and thinking about, again, ourselves and how when somebody just switches something on us, that's really hard. So think about how hard it is to be little and do that. So how can we make that easier? How can we prevent those meltdowns from happening? By just having some kind of strategy or warning or something that we use that, again, will help the child. So then there are just some different examples in here. And again, going back to like that 5 more minutes and having a conversation about that and how, these kinds of timers or warnings can really help with that. And then transition cues, again, kind of looking at those, how visuals can support those routines and prepare children for a transition that's coming. And, this is another place where it's fun to add in some of those fun things like, so if going from the house to the car is always tough, then doing some of those fun things like jumping like a frog or a kangaroo, and just all the things children are learning when you do that, but how it makes that transition fun. And then everybody doesn't start the day off completely frazzled because of the meltdowns that are happening because of those hard transitions. So it's a fun time to bring in some of those fun things where you could even just take a jar and put some of those craft sticks and put a sticker of a kangaroo or a frog or an elephant, or, and the child could actually draw something out, and then you stomp, down the hall to bed like an elephant, or, jump like a kangaroo to the car, those kinds of things. So you can work in some fun things here. All right, that first then part, which we already kind of talked about. And then just a little bit on, going back to that positive encouragement and, those positive comments and encouragement, feedback when children are doing the kinds of things that you want to see them doing. So kind of reinforcing that, linking it back to that second session there. So the kinds of things that they are going to apply and try, they're going to go back to that routine that they selected, which they said was hard for their child, that they've broken down the steps a little bit. And think about some of those prevention kinds of things that might work. So think about visuals, choices, scripted stories. What kind of thing do they think might work? And again, they can use that family routine guide if you choose to kind of embed that in there or not. But we want them to leave with some strategies for those, breaking down those steps and then supporting their child through that part of the routine. Okay. We want them just to focus on that one behavior, that one routine or that one transition that's hard for their child. And it says try at least 3 strategies, but again, I think you have to be careful with that based on that particular group and where they're at and how they're responding and how how's it going with apply and try it before we kind of say, try 3 strategies. Okay? But you want them to leave the session with at least one idea of something they're going to try around that hard routine or that transition. Okay, so let's stop for a minute here and think about the power of routines. 2 things. What are your thoughts? What do you want to remember about this section? And then what's a good make and take for this one? What do you think? You might do. It's easier, on home visit, it's easier to individualize. But again, we're going to think about this as having a group, a parent group. So what's a good make and take?
I think just the visual charts, maybe. They have some ideas on Pinterest that we've seen years before that have just like cardstock paper, and they have pictures, small pictures that with different things for different routines, and then like little Velcro pieces just that are stick on. And you can just, have the times on there. And okay, it's 8 o'clock. Pull it down. What do we do at 8 o'clock? And it's whatever activity. That would be good.
Yeah, and that would tie into this. We didn't really talk about, but that, like that, where you might have that child who it's a lot easier if they can pull it off and then it's finished, right? Put it away. So yeah. What are some other ideas about that you think parents would get excited about trying with their child? Okay, so in chat, print out and laminate the visual charts for parents to individualize for their families. Yes, so that would be one you could do. The visual with steps on how to add a picture of their own child to the visuals. Yeah, and those resources that I showed you that are part of these materials so that you can just click on and go to that particular handout. Those have step-by-step procedures. Again, you might want to take them and individualize them for families, but a lot of those handouts and those resources have those kind of steps on there where families can do that.
One thing I wanted to add, one that I just went over with one of my parents at a home visit, we talked about routines, but we also talked about how life doesn't always stay on track and things happen. And that, you may have a late night or something that will kind of throw things off. But we talked about kind of helping the child with the coping skills, not just for the child, but for the parent too. Like when our routines are off, it gets us out of whack too. So we talked about that also. And that just kind of ties into what we talked about earlier, about behaviors and how to help them with that. So,
yeah. And even I think sharing that information with teachers too, just to say, oh, we had a really late night last night, so you can, as a teacher, provide more support also. Know that that's coming. Okay, here's some more. The visual with steps on how to, oh, no, I did that one. Transition activities they can make and use at home. Like you said, hopping like a frog, to the bed or to the car, or, if we think about some of those activities like, tiptoeing, think about bedtime, I guess, hopping like a frog may not be a good idea now that I think about it, because you're going to get them all like active again, but how you could tiptoe quietly or, take a flashlight and find your way to the bed, or doing some of those kinds of things. So you could even have a little jar with some of those little craft sticks where, children could pull out one for transitions. Sharing with teachers about nights. Yeah. Okay. All right. Anything else?
I like the choices when you talked about the choices, because some young people today, they can really make their choices and stuff. So that makes them feel like they're important too.
Yeah. And that you have a little bit of control over what's happening, right?
Yes,
so we know that with behavior, that's an important one, to feel like as a child that I have some control over what's happening here.
Make them little leaders.
Yeah. Yep. Okay, while we're on this, before we go to the next session, which families have really liked this new power of routine section and strategies, and kind of come back excited, even like the first then, that's another really good make and take kind of thing for families, because that's an easy one to try to use. That first we do this, then this happens, right? But They've really liked Power of Routines, but the next session on Teach Me What to Do has a lot of the materials. If you're familiar with a lot of the pyramid materials, you'll see a lot of familiar things in there. So, but that consistently has been one of the favorite sessions of families. So before we jump into that, I want to take just a minute and just get your thoughts on kind of what you're thinking now. Are there any, does this look like stuff you could use that would be useful? Are there challenges or barriers that you're, as we're talking about some of these things that you're thinking might pop up that might make it a little bit harder to use, or anything we could problem solve or share ideas around that you're thinking at this point?
I just like how we talked about helping the parent to build a toolbox that's tailored to their family and needs. By asking questions and helping them to think what their child needs or want, or when also what they want too.
Yeah. And that's that important piece of having time to have those conversations too, where we're not just throwing a lot of resources and things at them, but we're helping them think about how you would use those materials, how it might work for your family. And then they have choices, because we don't expect them to try all these strategies, right? But they can kind of pick what fits and feels right for them and for their family to try. All right, I'm going to throw one more question out here quickly. So are you guys okay with the way we're doing this? Do you want me to shift something? I'm happy to do that.
I'm good with it.
Okay. All right. Everybody else pretty much okay? All right. But as we go, like I said, just please, we can shift gears if we need to. Okay. All right. So let's move on to this part that is like the favorite of everybody. So we're going to do a breakout group with this one. But since some of you have the materials and the scripts and some don't, I'm going to do just a quick overview of what's in here. So when you get in your breakout groups, if you don't have the scripts and that piece, then you still have an idea of what's in here. All right, I want you to keep in mind that we're talking hour and a half sessions. Yes, it's set up for 2 hours, but a lot of times that's just not realistic for us to ask families or for families to commit that time, right? So keep in mind that hour and a half, and let's just think about how this might work. Okay. All right. So in this one, we're going to go back to that. What happened when they tried, some of those strategies around that hard routine for them? And then going back to that affirmation, how do we keep reinforcing that fact of how important they are to their child, right? And now we're going to focus on teach me what to do. So this is still, when we can prevent those behaviors from happening, we have more opportunities to teach children what to do, right? So we're going to focus on emotional literacy, controlling anger, and handling disappointment, and problem solving. So you can already tell that's a lot, right? I mean, that's a lot of stuff, right? Important things, but that's hard. So look at the family materials on this one. Okay. There's a lot there. So that's why we want to kind of pick and choose. By this point, this is the 5th session. We have a pretty good idea of this particular group of families, the kinds of things that are issues and challenging for them, the kinds of things they've been trying, the kind of successes they've been having. So we have a little bit more information going into this also. And we're going to keep going back to that list that we put up, or with those social emotional kinds of things that we said at that very first session that we were going to work on throughout these 7 sessions. We want to keep tying that back every single time. So this one's going to have a lot of information in it around teach me what to do, but a lot of fun stuff that we know that families have, they try it, they come back, they're excited about it. And even if they have pieces that didn't work, by this point, they're feeling safe enough with each other that other families will say, you know, oh, wait, I tried that and the same thing happened, but then I did this. So they really start sharing more ideas. So your job gets easier and easier as a facilitator as these sessions go on. All right, so let me just look at this. All right, these are facilitator materials that you might have available to use during this session. So this would be for covering all those areas that we talked about. Okay. We got those, right? Then there's some additional family materials, but again, I think that with these that have lots of words on them, that we might think of how we might use those in a different way to share information with families. So, and that backpack connection series, you know, those were developed to be put into children's backpack, but again, and sent home. Because there are lots of words, they have some great strategies in them. So a lot of times people will just pull out the strategies and put those in newsletters or e-blast or focus on those on home visits or, you know, again, however you're communicating with families. So in this one session, we're not trying to bombard families with everything. Okay. So this is that part we just talked about. So it starts off kind of talking about the focus is on teach me what to do. So when is the best time to teach? Is it when they're having that meltdown? And we often try to teach them something then, but they just don't hear it, right? I mean, as we do the same thing, when you're really upset, that's not the best time to try to teach a new skill. All right, we're not going to do that yet. So we'll do the breakout groups in a minute. But all right, so emotional literacy, I want you to think again, think about time, think about families, and in your breakout groups, you're going to talk about a plan for session 5. Like if you were doing these as groups, knowing this is the content, what might you do? And you also can think about what are other ways you could use these on home visits, on family nights, those kinds of things. Okay. All right. So we know that emotional literacy is that those hard skills of starting to recognize, label, understand, manage feelings. So hard skills, right? So thinking about the emotion words that a child knows. Now, I added this extra resource in here. So the one that says family engagement activity is a newer resource on the Challenging Behavior website that came after these new materials were put together. So I'll tell you about that one in a second, but you know, there's on the website and you have the links in your package to all of these. There's all those emotion words with faces on them. So thinking about all the different ways that you can use those. So when you're in your breakout groups, you can, if somebody has a script, you can kind of look at the script and see what the ideas are, as well as just knowing all these resources are here. So again, think about what would be the plan for session 5 with families. So the reason I put this family engagement activity on, it is, it's a page that you can send home with families where they kind of listen to the kinds of emotion words that their child's using, and they kind of check if they're using those. Now, my caution with this one would be, so this would be a great school to home link. The kinds of emotion words that are being worked on in a classroom, you would want to change this form to match up with that, right? Because those are the words you've really been talking about and working on and explaining what they are, and see if children are using them at home. So the words that are on that particular handout may or may not fit for the kinds of things that have been going on at school. So think about that. But the other part of this that's not in your script that is fun to do is to ask families, what emotion words do you hear your children using? And then what emotion words are they using as adults? Because in your script, it talks about how important it is for children to have a larger emotion vocabulary. So this whole section is kind of on how can I support that? So it makes a big difference when we pay attention to ourselves, because, research shows that even as adults, we tend to stay with the mad, sad, happy, those kind of words. So it can be a fun conversation to think about what kind of words they're using. And there are lots of different resources around this piece. Okay. All right. Another fun activity with Today I Feel, that particular resource, is as families are coming in for session 5, is to have one of either the feeling wheel or Today I Feel, and have them put how they're feeling. So as they enter the room or wherever you're having your session, they put how they're feeling. And then throughout the session, they can change how they're feeling if that changes. So it's just an example of what we would love for them to do with their child, right? Or they could do it at dinner time. At the dinner table, they can talk about how they're feeling, those kinds of things, right?
I actually used the Today How I Feel when I was a teacher in my classroom. So I would have it up on the wall and they would
Yeah.
and the parents would come in and see it and they're like, oh, can I have a copy? So they'd have it at home. That's how I connected the feelings to them.
That's great. And you know what? That's another great kind of school to home link, right? If you're using it in a classroom, then sending one home to families would be great. Love it. Thank you. All right. So emotional literacy, you got the kind of emotion words, how you're feeling. But then another part of that is reading books that support emotional literacy, right? And there are all kinds of books now on emotional literacy. Right? So I want you to think about that one. So at that point, when you get through, they're going to select 2 or 3 emotion words that they want to teach, and some fun ideas about how they might teach them, because you've been kind of talking about some of those, right? All right. Then after that section is self-regulation and anger management. Self-regulation, that labeling emotions, starting to recognize emotions, all that's part of self-regulation. So these kind of tie into each other. So with this section, it really focuses on kind of recognizing those big emotions, and that young children, they have big emotions, but they have very few tools to deal with those emotions. So it's important for us to know that, as parents, right? So here's some strategies that you can use to help them learn to calm down, as they're expressing that. So most of you are probably familiar with the turtle technique. So that's in this section. As well as ways to teach the turtle technique. There's also just the smell the flower, blow the pinwheel. So if you had pinwheels, and those are visuals, and again, those visuals are in different languages, but that. And thinking about the fact that, when we talk about strategies, it's not just strategies for when they're angry. So often that's what we focus on, strategies for learning how to calm down. But what if I'm really disappointed? What if I'm super excited and I'm just bouncing all over the place? So we also want strategies for just helping children with different big emotions that they're feeling, right? Okay, so these are some of the resources, and these are in the script in your PowerPoint, right? So just taking a break, using a calm down area at home. Okay. So this is a nice way tying into that timeout and using it more as a calm down area, right? And supporting your child in that. So it talks about some of those kind of strategies, as well as some of these visuals that you can just send home and then have families like put it up on the refrigerator, and that the adults model for children when they're upset, kind of using these strategies also and teaching those to children. Okay. Then we get problem solving. So, okay, I want you to think about all that content already and that you need time to talk about them, to share the resources, how you might use them, and to process it. Okay. So then we have problem solving. So once they learn some of these strategies, if they are upset for calming down, then we can't leave out that step of, okay, when they're calm, what could they do? So instead of throwing that truck, what could I do? Right. So problem solving steps. And again, you've got those resources that I showed you in the beginning that are for parents. So Tucker Turtle at home, problem solving at home. So they're scripted stories written more for home, right? So I can be a problem solver at home. So we would have these resources out for families. And then practice thinking of, this solution kinds of things. So the steps that you might go through with your child. Okay. And then just kind of setting that stage for success, knowing your child. Like if you know that every time you go to the park and somebody's on their swing, they have a huge meltdown, then we know before we go to the park that we're going to have conversations about, okay, if we go to the park and somebody's on your swing, what can we do? And you're problem solving with your child. So there's different scenarios like that. All right, remember the first one was they were going to try to pick 2 or 3 emotion words to teach and try to come up with fun ways to do that. Now this one is, doing like either the calming down kind of thing or problem solving and how they might use those materials to teach their child some of those skills. Okay. And that's their apply it and try it. So what I want to do now is we're going to go into, well, wait, do you have any questions first? I just want you to have a big picture of what's there. Okay, and you know that this is one of the favorite ones, that families really love these resources. Okay, so in your breakout groups, I want you to just kind of think about what a plan might be for a session. And also some of those other ideas of how you might use these materials in different ways. But knowing that you have a limited amount of time, what do you think, like problem solve a little bit about what this session might look like, or what are some different options for, again, kind of expanding that parent family members toolkit around some of these tools that they can use. So if we can go into the breakout groups again, Karen, and I'm going to do that magic number again of just 7 minutes, because I think that gives you time to really think through and process some different ideas. And then we'll come back and share those ideas so everybody can get more ideas about how they might use them. Throw out some good ideas here. Knowing how important this is to families and that they love this section and they really use this section. What did you come up with? How might you do this?
Well, in our group, we talked about maybe choosing, maybe not covering all, but choosing a few of the topics. One of the young ladies mentioned the reading the book part, having the book, because we also talked about how they're able to connect the feelings of the character to their own. And then we also talked about how, with them being in a school setting, they're familiar with reading books. Mm-hmm. Also will encourage literacy for the family as a whole. And I thought that was a great idea.
Yeah. And that is a great idea. And what someone mentioned earlier is that opportunity to model how you might read a book also, to your child, to engage them, because that's come up a lot in the groups that we've done. Like I can't get my child, they don't want to sit and read a book with me, or they don't want to, I have a hard time with that. So, that gives more strategies around that. Plus, the power of I was just reading something research wise where it was talking about when we read fiction books to young children, in their head, it's like a real life scenario. So when you're reading those books, not just the ones that talk about, I mean, we want to do that too, but where it has a face and an emotion, that kind of thing, but where it's a book where there really are, it's a story and it has emotions in it. Then that helps them, like, again, kind of building their toolbox. It's like living that real life situation. So it gives them strategies of things they can do when they're in those situations. So that's a powerful one. And that's certainly a strategy to think about really focusing on one of these and building on it. What are some other groups come up with?
We talked about how conscious discipline can be connected to this. There's a lot of different breathing techniques and things like that for them to use.
Yeah. Yeah. So linking things you're already using, right? And building on that. Okay. Such as conscious discipline. What else do you come up with?
Yeah, in my program, they combine like conscious discipline. The teachers do the part with the kids. They apply with the kids. And us as a family support workers, or as during last year, we had like in every parent meeting, we were reviewing each, like 7 parts of a conscious discipline. We're reviewing each time with like a parent training.
Yeah.
Like to make like feel the parent understand what the kid is taking with them from school, to make them understand and match each other.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, I think so that works.
Okay.
And also I was saying like right now in one of my classrooms, when the day starts, I'm not teacher, but I'm there sometimes here and there. They have like a board before where the kid has to choose the feeling of that day. They put the picture how they feel that day, and then they go and wash hands.
Yeah.
It's very like teachers are motivating them to express if they are sad. They are, oh, you are sad. What is going on? Like motivating them to talk.
Yeah.
They have also like area where they can go and distress themselves if they are coming crying or something happened to them.
Yeah.
It's another thing. And also like right now the family meetings change a little bit. I do a small part now, but the teachers are doing each month like parent-child activity. It's like making more connection, which one I like it because parents are attending. Parent meetings, the attendance wasn't too high like this now, because now parents has the opportunity to be in the classroom, to spend and doing an activity with kids, maybe for 30 minutes, even reading or work. And I think so that helps parents to understand and also stimulate their creativity. Like, because they can see how the teachers read and they are learning how to create more things and looking around in the classroom.
Yeah.
I like this modality this year also because we are engaging more parents in the program.
That's great. Lots of ideas there. Okay. What did some other groups come up with? Because this is a real dilemma for this one, I think, when you're using it, because it does have so many good things in it. So what were some other ideas that you had about sharing with families?
Our group mentioned on how we approach the families, how we deliver our ideas, or how we talk to them in presenting it, because you have to be sensitive on how you approach the subject.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Good conversation there.
Our group kind of did the same. We went off of that and we talked about how, as a teacher, sometimes I've seen that parents can be defensive if you tell them this information.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I like to approach it as something I tell them this is what we do in the classroom. We found this works really well.
Exactly.
Extend the learning at home. That way it's not a direct, you need to work on this. It's more open, but it's providing them that information in a less scary way almost.
Yeah, that's critical. And I think with if you think about the sessions at this point, you've kind of, you've been together for 5 sessions. So you really are starting to build those relationships. So you do have to think about with that group, how do I introduce these? And these are just suggestions of strategies, right? Because that's where those conversations become important about, families feeling comfortable saying, I don't know about that one. I don't know if that would work, and time to problem solve around those. Because even with something like the turtle technique, that's not going to work for every child. You guys know who are teachers. It doesn't matter what strategies you're using. It often doesn't work for every single child. So you got to figure out what's going to work for that particular child. And just one resource to share with you all. There's a book called Buddy the Bulldozer Learns How to Calm Down. And that was actually written by a mom whose child, they were using Tucker, the turtle, in his classroom, and he just didn't connect with Tucker, the turtle. And yet his mom felt like he really needed those strategies, and he loved bulldozers. So if you think about how many of our kids love things that go, those kinds of things. So she wrote this book, uses the exact same steps as the turtle technique, but Buddy, when he gets angry, his engine overheats and he has to learn how to cool his engine down. So just thinking about with families too, like, for their child, what kinds of things might help? What strategies might you be able to use? And these are just examples. Anybody else have anything you want to throw out there?
I wanted to share one more thing that our group talked about. We talked about how our parents can also benefit from the information.
Yeah.
It's something they may not have known, how to tap in with their emotions or ways to cope with their emotions. And so it's just helpful for the family as a whole.
Yes.
So we talked a little about that.
And so I have to tell you this funny story with that one. So this was literally when our first round of funding with Pyramid Things. And so in one of the programs, they were using the turtle technique, and there was one little boy who they were really working with the family, together to help support him. And so he had a little turtle that he would carry around as a reminder to use the turtle technique. And he would bring it to school every day and then take it home and then bring it back. And so he didn't bring it one day. And when the teacher asked him where his turtle was, he said, I thought my daddy could use it more today. So, you think about, it really does, it gives all of us strategies, right? So I think that emotional literacy piece too is just, even as a parent, understanding how hard these skills are, that as adults, we have days where we struggle with emotions and that sort of thing. So that we're just trying to lay the foundation here for our children. So I think those kind of reassuring things are important also. These are hard skills. They're hard. So the more we can practice them, the better, Okay, so any parting thoughts here on this section, things that you want to, let me share this. So what we tried one time is setting up stations. And so families could pick kind of where they wanted to go. It meant we had to have extra adults for that session. But so there was a group that had some books, and they were demonstrating kind of reading the books. And then there was a group that had that did Tucker Turtle. And so if you went to that station, then you actually practice. Like they would kind of walk through how to use that, how to practice it. There's that turtle pattern where you can, with paper plates, make the turtle, make his head go in and out. So he takes deep breath. You can practice those. So they did that sort of thing. Then they had the problem solving solution kit as an area set up where they could practice that. And that worked really well because parents were making choices based on kind of where their child was at and what they thought would be really useful. And then they got to go practice it, and they could do more than one if they wanted to. You know, if they were like, okay, I got this one, or I don't think that's going to work now that I've seen you actually use it, then they could go try another one. So, okay. And this one I think lends itself to lots of different make and takes, right? And resource wise, again, if you're focusing on the books, we've had, well, I mean, a lot of people will write grants to just have some extra money for some of these resources where you can buy the turtle puppets or buy books, those kinds of things to give families. So, you know, just thinking about, are there ways that we can not only use these resources we have available to us, but that we can kind of expand on that a little bit. What, tell me what you mean by what topic did they have on the flyer?
So, for example, at the beginning of the school year, the first event that I have is called Pyramid, Pastries Pyramid. It's a theme. So like pastries and pyramid model, but I can't remember exactly my theme. But so I have a topic on each flyer. So I was just wondering for this event, what did it say? Like, you know, like addressing behaviors or something like that. But
yeah. You mean for the whole, like positive solutions for families?
Well, no, for what you sent home to invite the parents to come to the event. So on the flyer.
Yeah. So we don't do individual ones for each, like an individual flyer for each session. It's a flyer for positive solutions for families. People have done that in lots of different ways. Some of them will list these, you know, remember right in the beginning, I showed you guys the 7 sessions, but you have to remember too, a lot of those don't have a whole lot of meaning for families. So kind of trying to figure out how to put those in words that entice families to come. So it has the 7 session, it has when they are, if you're providing food or whatever, you know, to make that commitment to come to these sessions. But you know, you wouldn't use words like on a flyer, like emotional literacy, right? It would be like teaching your child about feelings and emotions, or helping your child learn learn how to calm themselves, or books that we can read to help our children learn about emotions, those kinds of things where it would have more meaning. Does that make sense?
It does, but I'm just trying to see, because I love this idea of the stations, and I'm just trying to see when I do this session, how could I?
Yeah.
I don't do mines like, I don't put a list of everything that's going to take place for that whole school year. I don't do it like that.
You do it individually, right?
Yeah,
I mean, like as they happen.
No, each month.
Yeah,
so like,
yeah. As it happens each month or whatever. Yeah. Instead of one. Yeah. So I think on this one, based on how you were going to try to do it, that I would do those things like, you know, books to help your child learn about emotions, ideas for helping your child learn how to calm themselves, or helping your child learn how to problem solve. You know, I would put some of those kinds of titles that would make more sense to families. Anybody else have? We have one called Little People, Big Emotions. That would be a good one. Actually, that would be a good one because all those different stations support Little People, Big Emotions, right? Anybody else have some other ideas?
I love that one.
Yeah, that's a great one, right? That's much better than what I was coming with off the top of my head. And that's one that would grab your attention, right? And I mean, make you think, ooh, I'm going to go see that. That would be good, right? And that you're giving families resources and strategies that they can use. to help with those big emotions.
I have a question. Are we just inviting the parents to these sessions, or are we allowing them to bring their kids? This way they can kind of demonstrate what they're learning to their kid.
That is a great question. Yeah, that's a great question. So what we've done with that is if, like, again, different sites have different resources available. So if it's a situation where you're providing childcare, what we've done is we have the sessions where we talk about and kind of practice using them and why they're important, those kinds of things, like we've been talking about different strategies. And then we bring the children in at the end so the parent can practice it, using it with their child, you know, or like the turtle, when we did the little turtle pattern out of paper plates. So that turtle pattern it's on the Challenging Behavior website. And, you know, you use little paint sticks to put the head and the tail on so they can make the head go inside the turtle shell. Then we brought the children in, and the parents, along with their child, helped decorate the turtle shell like the child wanted to. Again, kind of practice those steps, but then they did that together. So I think it depends. I think it would be hard to have the children in there the whole time, because you're sharing all these different strategies with families. They're having an opportunity to talk about like some of the behavior things that might be challenging to them. And I think those opportunities don't come up a lot. You know, we don't always provide those opportunities for families. So I think there's a real advantage to having just the parents or families in there, but then you could bring the child in at the end and they could do something together. That might be the make and take kind of thing, even, as well as practicing using some of those strategies. Does that make sense? Or anybody has some other ideas around that? Okay, those are great questions. So let's do our 15-minute break now, because we got like, we'll have like almost 45 minutes left, and we'll just finish up those last two so you kind of know what's in those last two sessions, and then we can problem solve a little bit more around advertising, how you might use these, you know, what kinds of words are going to engage and entice families. So we can kind of problem solve around some of those things, or again, those challenges or barriers that you might see with some of the materials. Okay. Okay. Hopefully that was good, just to stand up and move a little. I know afternoons are hard, but we're almost there. So Debraka, I don't know if I'm pronouncing your name correctly, but that was a great idea that she had. I mean, I think that's another way to think about how you might use these materials. If you do monthly kinds of things, you could advertise them monthly and instead of trying to do this session that people are committing to.
I made a mistake, and it wasn't for just Alexis, but I hit direct message. I put in an example, so I did parents, pastries, and the pyramid model. So like stuff like that. That's what I was trying to say.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, that's a great idea. And I hate to even mention this one, but many times people who are doing the actual sessions, they've added an additional session because of session 5, wanting to be able to cover more in that session. And that idea came from the families, not the facilitators, where families asked, could we have an extra session so we can get more of these resources? So, you know, I know that's a hard one, but it is another option. If families are really into it and they're willing to come one more time and they really are using the materials and having success with them, then, you know, that would be a great thing to honor, right? So just one more idea there. Okay, so we just got 2 last sessions to go. Again, kind of think about the amount of material that we've covered though. So, and we do want it to be meaningful to families. So I think as we've thought about what are some of those make and take kinds of things after every session that you could send home with families or that they could make, that, you know, we also want to keep thinking about how do we bring these materials to life? So if you're doing the sessions and you're sitting there and you're facilitating, and let's say you are using the PowerPoint, that how do you bring them to life for families? Because a lot of these slides you'll see in a minute have a lot of words on them. So we haven't had role plays or things like that since the first 2 sessions. So just thinking about what kinds of things can I do to bring it to life more? Practicing these strategies is one way to do it, where we model it and then people practice them, right? But just keep that in mind also as we talk about these last 2 sessions, because this one also has a lot of strategies in it and kind of stays focused on that prevention piece again. So one of the family materials in this particular session is called a reinforcer inventory. And if we go back to where we were talking about parents kind of knowing what kinds of things their child's interested in, or that their child really loves, or those kinds of things, sometimes that's hard for families to come up with. So this is a form that really just helps them think about, you know, what kind of activities or objects or activities does my child like a lot, or what's some of their favorite kinds of things. So that's for this session, but you also could introduce this earlier if you wanted to just help families kind of figure out what their child's interested in. Okay. You also, one other thing, you know, the form that we did, that was one of their apply it and try it, that when they were being the behavior detective and they were focused on that one behavior or routine, and they were trying to figure out what their child might be communicating through that behavior. You can keep, after every session, like send that form home again, and they keep kind of building on that and getting better at putting those clues together, being that behavior detective, because it kind of ties into everything we've talked about here. Okay, let's see, where do you find this form? Pam, it's in your materials, like at the beginning in the facilitator guide, at the very end of that facilitator's guide, it has all the materials that you need with the link. And all you have to do is click on the link. It's on the challengingbehavior.org website also. So you could just go there and in the resource library, put in reinforcer inventory, and it'll give it to you that way. But it is in the Positive Solutions for Families materials. Okay. So this one is going to keep going with that prevention piece and how prevention can really be a powerful strategy when we're, for teaching new skills, when we're helping our child around certain behaviors. So strategy wise, it kind of focuses on logical consequences and redirection, and then going back to that, keeping it positive as we're doing these things. So I'd love to hear what you guys think about this as we're going through this, because this is another one. The logical consequence part is another one that families have had real aha moments around. So not something that they necessarily were using or kind of had heard of before. So they'll say things like, that makes so much sense, but I've never seen anybody use that, so I didn't know about that. So keep thinking about how we're supporting their competence and confidence, and how we support them feeling really good as a parent. And we all know if you have a child, well, even a young child, just developmentally, it's hard sometimes. So just getting that pat on the back or that affirmation about, your parenting skills can be a really big and powerful strategy also. So this one does go back to kind of that reviewing those, that behavior detective piece about what happens before the behavior, what happens after. This also comes up again in that last session. So it's kind of building on that behavior piece again and what they've been trying to figure out about their child. And this is where conversations will often come up about why they think their child's using certain behaviors. So they're starting to narrow things down a little bit. Okay. And just knowing that, that the behaviors that are talked about in this session are going to, again, provide those strategies that we can use to prevent a behavior from happening and then teach them new skills, because we've talked about kind of trying to figure out why the behavior is happening. We've talked about strategies we can teach them to do and some prevention strategies, and we're going to build on that. So this, just helping us have a good day, that's another newer, it's been on there for a while, resource for families that just kind of reinforces that when we have the routine. So this might even be a good one to put into routines, but it's also those positive strategy things we can use. So it's pulling together several of those strategies that you've already talked about. So choices and rules and really focusing on what you want your child to do. When you see them doing that we want to make sure that the child knows that, right? So it's got some of those strategies that you've already talked about earlier. So it's a nice way to kind of bring those together. Okay. And that it helps everybody's day get off to kind of a good start there. All right. So some of the strategies, plan ahead. So we mentioned that a little bit in the last session, but this is another one when you think about what are some of those strategies that are small changes, but can have a big impact. So we might not always think about, what's something that's hard for our child to do? So what can we do to kind of set them up for success more? So helping them be prepared. So that's what this whole point is about. So we want to really get families to think about how their child reacts in certain situations. How do they react to surprises or disappointments? So it's kind of like going back to that reinforcer inventory, but really digging in a little bit deeper about really observing your child and getting more clues about your child. Because we can learn a lot from those patterns of behavior from children. So we want families to kind of think about, there are those children who can recover quickly and those children who have a harder time when there's surprises or disappointments that come up. So, when we plan ahead, then it can make it easier for the child. And in your script, it gives, more examples, but even things like, think about, because this is kind of a typical situation. Let's say you're going someplace and you're going to get a tire changed and your child has to come with you and you're going to be sitting there for a while. Well, I know that's going to be really hard for my child. So how can I plan ahead? What are some things I can do that are going to make it easier for me and easier for my child, right? So getting them to think about some of those kinds of things. I could take a coloring book or I could take colors and a sheet of paper, but I'm going to try to make it easier for my child to sit and be there for a while. I'm going to take their favorite book. I might take a snack, those kinds of things, right? So this part on knowing what is reasonable can be a little tricky to have a conversation around, but just thinking about development again and what our expectations are. And we've been talking about some of those things in the earlier sessions with just that part, those parts on, like what are our expectations? And then how do we teach them about those? Like with rules, what are the expectations? How do you teach them about those? So we've already talked about some of those things, but trying to be realistic about if we want our children to pick up their toys, have we shown them how we pick up toys and where we put them? Have we practiced those things? Like, okay, I'll pick up a toy, you pick up a toy, until we know that they have those skills. So it's kind of like that, again, setting them up for success. And there's nothing wrong with kind of lowering the bar a little bit to get started, right? So just getting families to really be reflected on. They get really frustrated sometimes because it's like, but I've shown him how to do that. Well, something's not working about that. So we want to go back in and try that again, right? And then kind of shifting to that, how we respond to challenging behavior with a purpose. So what kind of responses have we noticed on those other forms that we've been using that make it more likely that that behavior is going to keep happening, or less likely? And so by this point, because of those forms and the things that you've talked about around behavior, they really are beginning to see how the way they respond either keeps that behavior going or, lessens the chance that it will. Okay. So from there, there's this, so thinking about prevention strategies, right? So logical consequences, and it just goes through kind of what logical consequences are and kind of tips for those. And then it gives different scenarios, different examples, and you'll see examples in kind of different ways here. But, again, I think this gives ideas, if I've never used logical consequences, about what it looks like, what it sounds like, what words I might use, how I might do this. So, so he refuses to wash his hands before snack. She's saying, you need to do that. And then he continues to refuse. You can wash your hands and have a snack, or you can continue playing while your brothers have a snack. If you need help with washing your hands, I can help you. So it helps the adult, as we know, stay calm, right? So it helps me sort of regulate my response back to my child. So several different examples here, as you can see. And then there's an activity where families then, or parents, whoever there, they think about, okay, so let's think about the child's behavior. They're doing these certain things. What would be a logical consequence? So you have that practice part in here, right? Okay. And then we're going to apply it and try it. So they're going to think about some challenging situations that they have at home, always trying to bring it back to something that's meaningful. And then what might a logical consequence do? And this is another one where if you pair families up, pair parents up together, they have great conversations, and it's kind of easier for them to come up with some of those logical consequences. And then the next sort of strategies goes around redirection. So redirection is another, I think, one that can be tricky, but it's prevention, right? So, it's when those things are happening, like you have a child who's splashing lots of water everywhere, and instead of that they get in trouble, and you think logical consequences, redirections, they're all things we use instead of any kind of discipline or punishment, right? So we're going to redirect the child away. So we might go, with the blocks, start playing with the child. So we redirect them to the blocks. Or you're on the phone, which happens all the time, and that's always when children want to try to get your attention. So another adult might be like, let's go upstairs and read some books, so they redirect the child from that behavior. So they're practicing, pieces around that. And then same kind of thing with logical consequences, where you practice, like, how could I redirect if these kinds of things are happening? And they tend to be typical kinds of things that happen in homes, right? So then ignore and stay calm. So conversations around when you can just ignore the behavior and how you do that, and how important staying calm is when you're doing that. So, and that whole idea of if a situation comes up and a reaction's necessary, that remember less is usually best, and kind of practicing some of those kinds of things. So acting calmly with a minimum amount of attention, tying some of those kind of pieces back together there. So, well, I'll show you this part. Well, keeping it positive. So this goes back to that reinforcer encouragement, but there's a place in here. Let me show you. So safety net procedures. I'm going to go back here. I thought I had this in here, so I might a little bit later. But when you're talking about this ignoring and staying calm part, so sometimes spanking comes up. And that's another, it's kind of like that timeout conversation we had. It's another place, though, when it does come up, to be able to talk about spanking. And, that again can create a lot of different emotions. And, well, it worked for me and I'm just fine. So some of those kind of conversations. So part of that is just being prepared, just like if you're going to do the sessions, as you're talking about some of these things, that often will come up. So just being prepared for how you want to handle that. And there are some notes and ideas in your script around that, but I do want to just point out that it is in that section and it often will come up. So especially if you talk about ignoring the behavior and people feel like you shouldn't ignore that behavior. So there are lots of examples in there around times when you might do that, when it might be appropriate to do that. And then just that note in there for the facilitators about that might come up. Anybody have thoughts around that?
Well, yeah, I was just kind of thinking, how would you address that? Because that's very touchy. People have different views and beliefs when it comes to that. But I just thinking about the reinforcement being positive, we're focusing on the positive. So spanking wouldn't necessarily be a positive reinforcement. So we can just kind of go back to previous, information that we talked about in ways that we can encourage the child in a positive way.
Yeah. And there's some things in there too, just around thinking about that positive encouragement and comments, right? And some of those disadvantages of spanking. And a lot of times, again, that's what I know. That's the way I grew up. That's what happened to me. So it can be an interesting conversation, but it also, like you said, can get really touchy. So just be prepared if it comes up of how you might want to address that. Okay. And to switch some of the negatives to more of that positive part and just giving more strategies, right? So here's some things you might try instead of spanking, right? Okay. So I always like to point that out just so people aren't surprised when they get to that section and see that part. But how are we doing time-wise? Okay, we're getting close here. Just going back to the power of encouragement and positive comments and keeping it positive. So thinking about, with that reinforcer inventory, what kinds of things motivate your child? What's reinforcing to your child? And just we're providing that encouragement and reinforcer immediately after that behavior occurs here. So, and there are lots of examples like, things like, well, Maria, you're doing such a good job waiting for your turn on the swing. Maybe next time you can go first and your brother can wait for his turn. So again, we're kind of like building those skills and plan ahead. So we know that's tough. So we've already had those conversations and come up with some strategies with our child about how they might deal with that. Then it talks a little bit about those safety nets. So when those behaviors are really harmful, right? When they might hurt a sibling or somebody else, ideas for some things that you can do around that to calm your child, and how, let's go back to like even session 5 and using some of those calm down strategies with your child. So you're teaching them. Again, when those big emotions take over, it's really hard when you're little to manage all of that. So how important that adult is, that parent is, again, in supporting their child through that, not that turning into more of a negative thing. So the apply it and try it here really focuses on some of the, like the logical consequences, the redirecting, some of those behaviors that we talked about earlier. So they already started practicing these with the forms, and they're just going to keep building on it, and they're going to try to use some of those logical consequences that they came up with. Okay, so let's see. So I'm looking at the chat. It's tricky, as I feel I need to be non-judgmental for this type of discipline. Yes, Jennifer, it's super tricky, and let families know that no, exactly. We're not trying to change their, their thoughts or what they do. We're just giving them alternatives to that, right? Because you don't want it to turn into that kind of really strange situation, because we are just giving alternatives. Sometimes it doesn't come up, but just be prepared if it does, because yes, we all have our feelings around spanking also, so it does make it really hard sometimes to do that. All right, anything about 6? You can see how we just keep building on those prevention and then tying those other pieces back. So we might prevent the behavior from happening, but we've also, we now have strategies that we're teaching them new skills to replace that behavior also. Okay. All right, anybody have thoughts, things you want to remember? I know it gets harder as the afternoon goes on, but anything in particular, or anything about these sections that you're going, I don't know.
Well, I like the point that the slide that talked about how how the parents respond to the challenging behavior will, determine the end result. And it helps to bring the parents to accountability, and not in a negative way. In a way where they can understand and in response, we'll use those response strategies in a positive way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And parent, when they try some of these things and they come back, they're really, based on how safe and comfortable they feel, they're really open about some of these things and a new way of thinking. And change is hard, right? And here we are trying some new strategies that may really, really be different from what I've been doing. So supporting that's important. Anything else anybody want to remember?
Yeah, I like telling the young person, now take a deep breath, because they seem to, get calm, then they can talk to you. So I like that.
Yeah. Great strategies. All right, let's see. One more chat thing here. I like thinking how a parent responds to challenging behavior has a purpose. Yeah. So that's what we're hoping, that, it really does kind of shift their thinking. Like we said, we already know, like with a lot of families, just that whole idea around behavior has meaning shifts their thinking around that. So really thinking about how, that saying about all right, I got to get this right. when you see a child differently, you see a different child, right? So it's kind of like that hot button activity. And this happens with us with families as well as families with children, that when our hot buttons get pushed, it changes our lens around that child or that family member, right? It makes it harder to like see the strengths. But when you take the time to do that, it literally changes the way you see that child. You see that child differently. You see that family differently. When you try to figure out the meaning of their behavior, right? So I think it's a really powerful thing across these sessions that families start seeing the strengths of their child. Sometimes when that behavior has just really gotten to them and worn them down. So we're giving them lots of strategies to support their competence and confidence. Okay, last session. And what you'll see with this one is it goes back to some of those things that we've already talked about, but it also uses that family routine guide a lot. So I'm glad you guys looked at it earlier, since time-wise we're getting short here. And again, you can kind of think about your families. How's it going at this point? By this point, we know the behaviors that they see as challenging that they're working on. They've already started digging deeper about the meaning of that behavior and some of those prevention strategies they can use and some of those things they can teach their child to do. So we have a pretty good idea of what's happening at this point with families. So you can see how you could really shift this last session. And this is also when I told you guys in the beginning, when I said I post those things that first session you talk about we're going to be working on, and you go back to those each time, that it's really fun to get families to go back and talk about the things that they've tried across all those, or changes that they've seen in themselves or their child around some of those. So keep those things. You have lots of flexibility here. Okay, I'm going to go through this kind of quickly here, but this one really is about trying to pull these pieces together. And when it says plan, we're not talking about like a positive behavior support plan. We're just talking about a plan in place for, how can I prevent it? Is there something else I could teach my child to do in a different way so they don't have to use that behavior, that kind of thing. And then we were just talking about how we respond, keeping ourselves calm, logical consequences, redirecting, those kinds of things. Right. So this goes back to, as you will see, kind of those going back to behavior has meaning, can mean lots of different things. We've talked about different prevention strategies, what you can teach your child, how we can respond. And that's a fun time too, where parents will really share some of the things that they've tried. I mean, they've been sharing them, but they keep trying things. So really kind of, pulling that together. So if you go by the script and what's in this last session, you actually get them to look just at the bedtime sleeping nap piece. And you kind of go through it again, kind of looking at what the meaning of that behavior might be, how we might prevent it. And again, that importance of, if we know or we have a best guess about why our child's using that behavior, then it's easier to prevent it because we know why they're using it. We can match why they're using it with how we're responding, what we're doing, right? Or the new skill that we're teaching them. So that's kind of what this part is about. It's pulling it all together. So now that we've looked at all these things, let's look at some of these routines. And you could, if you know bedtime's a problem, and that would be a good one to use, like if several families have brought that up, or you could pick and choose based on that. Okay. So then thinking about, teaching some new skills and really like prompting the child, modeling for the child, using that kind of positive descriptive feedback when we see them doing the kinds of things we want them to do. So providing lots of feedback for the child when they're using some of these kinds of things. Okay, so teaching those new skills. And then how do I respond when challenging behavior occurs? So there are lots of different examples in here. And again, almost all of them, we have to go back to as the adult kind of staying calm And, one of the really common strategies that people use is to say to your child in a calm voice, you can use your words, tell me, or show me. And so staying calm, but just not reacting to that behavior, but responding in a way that reduces the need to use that behavior. And, really thinking about those things like, because this will come up a lot, there are certain things that they have to do, like they have to get in a car seat, right? That's not a negotiable thing. They have to get in their car seat. So what kinds of things can we do? And that car seat thing comes up a lot in the groups that I've done. So, that really talking about like, okay, they have to get in the car seat. So we can give them choices like, okay, get in the car seat, you can hold your favorite bear, you can hold your blankie. Which one do you want to do? So those choices, again, tying it back in. And Heather, I love that. So Heather put for everyone, challenging children are challenging because they lack the skills to not be challenging. And that's a great thing to remember, right? They just don't have those skills. They have those big emotions and they need more skills to learn how to deal with those big emotions, right? So it's always good to keep that in mind. Or like that parent said, God, I really thought she was doing that just to drive me crazy. And then I realized she wasn't, right? So that really helps. Now, I'm not, some of you are, if you've gone through the pyramid training, the preschool training, module training, you've seen these behaviors, these videos before in module 3A and 3B, which is kind of top of the pyramid sort of things. So just time-wise, I'm going to show you a little bit of these. And again, it would be one of those decisions of knowing your group. And does this make sense at all? Because this was a child who had a behavior support plan. Okay, so this is mom talking.
Seven, 6, 5, 4, 2, 1.
Okay, so as you set this up, this is a family who said that going to the library was so difficult because every single time, and it happened a lot in public places, but library in particular, like his behavior, they were asked to leave the library because of his behavior. So they couldn't go to the library. So that was one of the routines that they wanted to really look at. So this shows like videos of the parents kind of talking through, right? Sorry, we'll go to the next one. Talking through kind of that what their life was like before there was a plan put in place. So, all right, it's 10 till. Okay, wait a minute. All right. So these videos, so what this does is the family talks about they couldn't go anywhere, and even other family members didn't want them joining family outings because of the behavior of their child. This was a child with autism, but so, how hard that was for them. And so then when a plan was put in place, which is kind of the next part here, I'll show you the plan. So watch the difference between that going in the library and then this video. Alexis, I saw your comment. I didn't see it earlier. Yes, in that other one, she was counting, but they had a visual schedule there, as you could see, and they would practice the steps in the car before they would go in the library. So, that it gave them strategies they could use and strategies that were working for them, which we know sometimes you have to kind of figure that out, what works for that child and that family. But this other part of the video kind of talks about their life after the plan. So the things that, like Dad says, well, now we'll be out and I'll see somebody and they're telling their child, no, stop, don't do that. But they're not telling them what to do. I didn't know that before. Now we do that. So again, some of those little changes that make a big difference. But I think you have to think about your families that are in the group. And does this type video make sense? Because this child did have a plan in place. Okay. So, my computer, if any of you have a Mac and you see the beach ball, that's never a good sign. Oh, okay, wait a minute. So it's given out too. So what they do after you've kind of gone through that, and they see that video where there was a plan in place, and it doesn't, like I said in the beginning, it doesn't have to be a top of the pyramid behavior support plan. It can be that plan we've been talking about. What's the meaning of the behavior? What are some things I could do to prevent it? What are some skills I could teach my child so they don't have to use that skill? And then how can I respond to the new behavior, right? So then they kind of take that routine they've been working on, what they've come up with around their best guess about what they think the meaning of that behavior, what their child's trying to communicate. And then they go back to that family routine guide and try to figure out what can they do to prevent, what they can do to teach, and how they're going to respond. Okay. And then that kind of pulls it all together with it, because it's all those strategies and things that you've been talking about. And usually there's some kind of, again, that celebration of how important they are and, how important what they do is for their child. Okay. So let's stop for just a second. We only have a few minutes here, but thoughts, ideas, not necessarily about session 7, but ways you might use the material, some of the things that you thought about. And we've talked about different ideas across, but anything that you want to throw out that kind of is on your mind right now?
I have a question.
Okay.
Have you always done them in order, or have you changed up the order before? I know you said you can change the order, but
Yes.
I'm just curious to see how the order was that you had if you changed it.
Yes, because sometimes like some behavior things will come up. And so some of those in that session 5 that really gives some things they could try with their child to teach them, like some calming down kinds of things and all, we've had to move up a little bit earlier to keep parents there, right? So, where they have these specific strategies of things that they can take back and try. And because we know that session 5, those resources are ones that families really have responded to and used, that sometimes if the need is really strong with almost everybody in that group about just having some strategies to help regulate their child, then you might scoot that one up and not wait till 5. And then you can build on that within routines, how they could use those strategies within routines, which routines are hard for their child, and keep building on it that way. But yeah, you have that flexibility of what's going on with that group of parents. What are they interested in? What do they want to learn about? And because when we meet that need, then we can do the rest of it, because we've got them. We've got that hook that we were looking for that meets their need. Anybody else? Okay, it really is. And I know we've talked about doing the groups or using these materials in lots of different ways, but the groups really are fun because you really do start building relationships with families, and they get excited about some of where they feel a little bit more competent and in control of what's happening and the things they're trying, and the things they're seeing with their child. So it really is fun. And again, I want to say that there's so many different ways to use these materials in supporting families, outside of just trying to do a parent group that may be hard to do at the time. So, but, and I know Karen's got something. So any other thoughts or ideas? If you guys can't find any of the resources or, any of the things we talked about, or the problems we were having with kind of trying to find where the materials are, please I think I have my email on here. Please just shoot me an email and I'm happy to point you in the right direction with where those resources are. Okay. Thank you guys so much. It was fun spending the day with you all. So Karen, if you want to then do that